Chapter 21. The Abbé Scarrat. There was once in the Rue de Tournelles a house known by all the sedan chairmen and footmen of Paris, and yet, nevertheless, this house was neither that of a great lord nor of a rich man. There was neither dining, nor playing at cards, nor dancing in that house. Nevertheless, it was the rendezvous of the great world, and all Paris went there. It was the abode of the little Abbé Scarrat. In the home of the witty abbé dwelt incessant laughter. There all the items of the day had their source and were so quickly transformed, misrepresented, metamorphosed, some into epigrams, some into falsehoods, that every one was anxious to pass an hour with little Scarrat, listening to what he said, reporting it to others. The diminutive Abbé Scarrat, who, however, was an abbé only because he owned an abbey, and not because he was in orders, had formerly been one of the gayest prebendaries in the town of Mans, which he inhabited. On a day of the carnival he had taken a notion to provide an unusual entertainment for that good town, of which he was the life and soul. He had made his valet cover him with honey. Then, opening a feather bed, he had rolled in it, and had thus become the most grotesque fowl it is possible to imagine. He then began to visit his friends of both sexes, in that strange costume. At first he had been followed through astonishment, then with derisive shouts, then the porters had insulted him, then children had thrown stones at him, and finally he was obliged to run, to escape the missiles. As soon as he took to flight every one pursued him, until, pressed on all sides, Scarrat found no way of escaping his escort, except by throwing himself into the river, but the water was icy cold. Scarrat was heated, the cold seized on him, and when he reached the farther bank he found himself crippled. Every means had been employed in vain to restore the use of his limbs. He had been subjected to a severe disciplinary course of medicine. At length he sent away all his doctors, declaring that he preferred the disease to the treatment, and came to Paris, where the fame of his wit had preceded him. There he had a chair made on his own plan, and one day, visiting Anne of Austria in this chair, she asked him, charmed as she was with his wit, if he did not wish for a title. "Yes, your Majesty, there is a title which I covet much," replied Scarrat. "And what is that?" "That of being your invalid," answered Scarrat. So he was called the Queen's invalid, with a pension of 1,500 francs. From that lucky moment Scarrat led a happy life, spending both income and principal. One day, however, an emissary of the cardinal's gave him to understand that he was wrong in receiving the coadjutor so often. "And why?" asked Scarrat. "Is he not a man of good birth?" "Certainly." "Agreeable?" "Undeniably." "Witty?" "He has unfortunately too much wit." "Well then, why do you wish me to give up seeing such a man?" "Because he is an enemy." "Of whom?" "Of the cardinal." "What?" answered Scarrat. "I continue to receive Monsieur Gilles Despreaux, who thinks ill of me, and you wish me to give up seeing the coadjutor, because he thinks ill of another man. Impossible." The conversation had rested there, and Scarrat, through sheer obstinacy, had seen Monsieur de Gondi only the more frequently. Now the very morning of which we speak was that of his quarter-day payment, and Scarrat, as usual, had sent his servant to get his money at the pension office. But the man had returned and said that the government had no more money to give Monsieur Scarrat. It was on Thursday, the abbé's reception day. People went there in crowds. The cardinal's refusal to pay the pension was known about the town in half an hour, and he was abused with wit and vehemence. In the Rue Saint-Honoré Athos fell in with two gentlemen whom he did not know, on horseback like himself, followed by a lackey like himself, and going in the same direction that he was. One of them, hat in hand, said to him, "Would you believe it, monsieur? That contemptible Mazarin has stopped poor Scarrat's pension." "That is unreasonable," said Athos, saluting in his turn the two cavaliers. And they separated with courteous gestures. "It happens well that we are going there this evening," said Athos to the Vicomte. "We will pay our compliments to that poor man." "What then is this Monsieur Scarrat, who thus puts all Paris in commotion? Is he some minister out of office?" "Oh no, not at all, Vicomte," Athos replied. "He is simply a gentleman of great genius who has fallen into disgrace with the cardinal through having written certain verses against him." "Do gentlemen then make verses?" asked Raoul naively. "I thought it was derogatory." "So it is, my dear Vicomte," said Athos, laughing. "To make bad ones, but to make good ones increases fame, Witness Monsieur de Rotrou. Nevertheless, he continued, in the tone of one who gives wholesome advice, I think it is better not to make them. Then, said Raoul, this Monsieur Scarrat is a poet? Yes, you are warned, Vicomte. Consider well what you do in that house. Talk only by gestures, or rather always listen. Yes, monsieur, replied Raoul. You will see me talking with one of my friends, the Abbé d'Herblay, of whom you have often heard me speak. I remember him, monsieur. Come near to us from time to time, as if to speak, but do not speak, and do not listen. That little stratagem may serve to keep off interlopers. Very well, monsieur. I will obey you at all points. Athos made 2 visits in Paris. At 7 o'clock he and Raoul directed their steps to the Rue de Tournelles. It was stopped by porters, horses and footmen. Athos forced his way through and entered, followed by the young man. The first person that struck him on his entrance was Aramis, planted near a great chair on casters, very large, covered with a canopy of tapestry, under which there moved, enveloped in a quilt of brocade, a little face, youngish, very merry, somewhat pallid, whilst its eyes never ceased to express a sentiment at once lively, intellectual, and amiable. This was the Abbé Scarrat, always laughing, joking, complimenting, yet suffering, and toying nervously with a small switch. Around this kind of rolling tent pressed a crowd of gentlemen and ladies. The room was neatly, comfortably furnished. Large valances of silk, embroidered with flowers of gay colors, which were rather faded, fell from the wide windows. The fittings of the room were simple, but in excellent taste. 2 well-trained serving men were in attendance on the company. On perceiving Athos, Aramis advanced toward him, took him by the hand and presented him to Scarrat. Raoul remained silent, for he was not prepared for the dignity of the bel esprit. After some minutes the door opened, and a footman announced Mademoiselle Paulette. Athos touched the shoulder of the Vicomte. Look at this lady, Raoul. She is an historic personage. It was to visit her King Henry IV. Was going when he was assassinated. Every one thronged around Mademoiselle Paulette, for she was always very much the fashion. She was a tall woman, with a slender figure and a forest of golden curls, such as Raphael was fond of and Titian has painted all his Magdalens with. This fawn-colored hair, or perhaps the sort of ascendancy which she had over other women, gave her the name of La Lionne. Mademoiselle Paulette took her accustomed seat, but before sitting down she cast, in all her queen-like grandeur, a look around the room, and her eyes rested on Raoul. Athos smiled. Mademoiselle Paulette has observed you, Vicomte. Go and bow to her. Don't try to appear anything but what you are, a true country youth. On no account speak to her of Henry IV. When shall we 2 walk together? Athos then said to Aramis, presently. There are not a sufficient number of people here yet. We shall be remarked. At this moment the door opened, and in walked the coadjutor. At this name everyone looked around, for his was already a very celebrated name. Athos did the same. He knew the Abbé de Gondy only by report. He saw a little dark man, ill-made and awkward with his hands in everything, except drawing a sword and firing a pistol, with something haughty and contemptuous in his face. Scarrat turned around toward him, and came to meet him in his chair. Well, said the coadjutor on seeing him, you are in disgrace then, Abbé? This was the orthodox phrase. It had been said that evening 100 times, and Scarrat was at his 100th bon mot on the subject. He was very nearly at the end of his humoristic tether, but one despairing effort saved him. Monsieur, the Cardinal Mazarin has been so kind as to think of me, he said. But how can you continue to receive us? Asked the coadjutor. If your income is lessened I shall be obliged to make you a canon of Notre Dame. Oh no, cried Scarrat. I should compromise you too much. Perhaps you have resources of which we are ignorant? I shall borrow from the Queen. But Her Majesty has no property, interposed Aramis. At this moment the door opened and Madame de Chevreuse was announced. Every one arose. Scarrat turned his chair toward the door. Raoul blushed. Athos made a sign to Aramis, who went and hid himself in the enclosure of a window. In the midst of all the compliments that awaited her on her entrance, the Duchess seemed to be looking for someone. At last she found out Raoul and her eyes sparkled. She perceived Athos and became thoughtful. She saw Aramis in the seclusion of the window and gave a start of surprise behind her fan. Apropos, she said, as if to drive away thoughts that pursued her in spite of herself. How is poor Voiture? Do you know Scarrat? What, is Monsieur Voiture ill? Inquired a gentleman who had spoken to Athos in the Rue Saint-Honoré. What is the matter with him? He was acting, but forgot to take the precaution to have a change of linen ready after the performance, said the coadjutor. So he took cold and is about to die. Is he then so ill, dear Voiture? Asked Aramis, half hidden by the window curtain. Die, cried Mademoiselle Paulette bitterly. Why, he is surrounded by sultanas, like a Turk. Madame de Saintot has hastened to him with broth. La Renaudot warms his sheets. The Marquise de Rambouillet sends him his tisanes. You don't like him, my dear Parthenie, said Scarrat. What an injustice, my dear invalid. I hate him so little that I should be delighted to order masses for the repose of his soul. You are not called Leon for nothing, observed Madame de Chevreuse. Your teeth are terrible. You are unjust to a great poet, it seems to me, Raoul ventured to say. A great poet? Come, one may easily see, Vicomte, that you are lately from the provinces and have never so much as seen him. A great poet. He is scarcely 5 feet high. Bravo, bravo, cried a tall man with an enormous mustache and a long rapier. Bravo, fair Paulette. It is high time to put little Voiture in his right place. For my part, I always thought his poetry detestable, and I think I know something about poetry. Who is this officer? Inquired Raoul of Athos. Who is speaking? Monsieur de Scudery, the author of Clélie, and of Le Grand Cyrus, which were composed partly by him and partly by his sister, who is now talking to that pretty person yonder, near Monsieur Scarrat. Raoul turned and saw 2 faces just arrived. One was perfectly charming, delicate, pensive, shaded by beautiful dark hair, and eyes soft as velvet, like those lovely flowers, the heartsease, in which shine out the golden petals. The other, of mature age, seemed to have the former one under her charge, and was cold, dry and yellow. The true type of a duenna or a devotee. Raoul resolved not to quit the room without having spoken to the beautiful girl with the soft eyes, who by a strange fancy, although she bore no resemblance, reminded him of his poor little Louise, whom he had left in the Château de la Vallière and whom, in the midst of all the party, he had never for one moment quite forgotten. Meantime Aramis had drawn near to the coadjutor, who, smiling all the while, contrived to drop some words into his ear. Aramis, notwithstanding his self-control, could not refrain from a slight movement of surprise. Laugh then, said Monsieur de Retz. They are looking at us. And leaving Aramis he went to talk with Madame de Chevreuse, who was in the midst of a large group. Aramis affected a laugh, to divert the attention of certain curious listeners, and perceiving that Athos had betaken himself to the embrasure of a window and remained there, he proceeded to join him, throwing out a few words carelessly as he moved through the room. As soon as the 2 friends met they began a conversation which was emphasized by frequent gesticulation. Raoul then approached them as Athos had directed him to do. "'Tis a rondo by Monsieur Voiture that Monsieur l'Abbé is repeating to me," said Athos in a loud voice, "and I confess I think it incomparable." Raoul stayed only a few minutes near them, and then mingled with the group round Madame de Chevreuse. "Well then?" asked Athos in a low tone. "It is to be tomorrow," said Aramis hastily. "At what time?" 6 o'clock. "Where?" "At Saint-Mandé." "Who told you?" "The Count de Rochefort." Someone drew near. And then philosophic ideas are wholly wanting in Voiture's works, but I am of the same opinion as the coadjutor. He is a poet, a true poet. Aramis spoke so as to be heard by everybody. "And I too," murmured the young lady with the velvet eyes. "I have the misfortune also to admire his poetry exceedingly." "Monsieur Scarrat, do me the honor," said Raoul blushing, "to tell me the name of that young lady whose opinion seems so different from that of others of the company." "Ah, my young Vicomte," replied Scarrat, "I suppose you wish to propose to her an alliance offensive and defensive." Raoul blushed again. "You asked the name of that young lady. She is called the Fair Indian." "Excuse me, sir," returned Raoul, blushing still more deeply. "I know no more than I did before. Alas! I am from the country." "Which means that you know very little about the nonsense which here flows down our streets. So much the better, young man. So much the better. Don't try to understand it. You will only lose your time. You forgive me then, sir, said Raoul, and you will deign to tell me who is the person that you call the young Indian? Certainly, one of the most charming persons that lives, Mademoiselle Frances d'Aubagne. Does she belong to the family of the celebrated Agrippa, the friend of Henry IV? His granddaughter. She comes from Martinique, so I call her the beautiful Indian. Raoul looked surprised and his eyes met those of the young lady who smiled. The company went on speaking of the poet Voiture. Monsieur, said Mademoiselle d'Aubagne to Scarrat, as if she wished to join in the conversation he was engaged in with Raoul. Do you not admire Monsieur Voiture's friends? Listen how they pull him to pieces even whilst they praise him. One takes away from him all claim to good sense. Another robs him of his poetry, a third of his originality, another of his humor, another of his independence of character, a sixth. But good heavens! What will they leave him? As Mademoiselle de Scudery remarks. Scarrat and Raoul laughed. The fair Indian, astonished at the sensation her observation produced, looked down and resumed her air of naivete. Athos, still within the enclosure of the window, watched this scene with a smile of disdain on his lips. Tell the Comte de la Fère to come to me, said Madame de Chevreuse. I want to speak to him. And I, said the coadjutor, want it to be thought that I do not speak to him. I love him, for I know his former adventures, but I shall not speak to him until the day after tomorrow. And why day after tomorrow? Asked Madame de Chevreuse. You will know that tomorrow evening, said the coadjutor, smiling. Really, my dear Gondy, said the Duchess, you remind one of the Apocalypse. Monsieur d'Herblay, she added, turning toward Aramis, will you be my servant once more this evening? How can you doubt it? Replied Aramis. This evening, tomorrow, always command me. I will then. Go and look for the Comte de la Fère. I wish to speak with him. Aramis found Athos and brought him. Monsieur le Comte, said the Duchess, giving him a letter. Here is what I promised you. Our young friend will be extremely well received. Madam, he is very happy in owing any obligation to you. You have no reason to envy him on that score, for I owe to you the pleasure of knowing him, replied the witty woman, with a smile which recalled Marie Michon to Aramis and to Athos. As she uttered that bon mot, she arose and asked for her carriage. Mademoiselle Paulette had already gone. Mademoiselle de Scudery was going. Vicomte, said Athos to Raoul, follow the Duchess. Beg her to do you the favor to take your arm in going downstairs, and thank her as you descend. The fair Indian approached Scarrat. You are going already? He said. One of the last, as you see. If you hear anything of Monsieur Voiture, be so kind as to send me word tomorrow. Oh, said Scarrat, he may die now. Why? Asked the young girl with the velvet eyes. Certainly, his panegyric has been uttered. They parted, laughing. She turning back to gaze at the poor paralytic man with interest, he looking after her with eyes of love. One by one the several groups broke up. Scarrat seemed not to observe that certain of his guests had talked mysteriously, that letters had passed from hand to hand, and that the assembly had seemed to have a secret purpose quite apart from the literary discussion carried on with so much ostentation. What was all that to Scarrat? At his house rebellion could be planned with impunity, for as we have said, since that morning he had ceased to be the Queen's invalid. As to Raoul, he had attended the Duchess to her carriage, where, as she took her seat, she gave him her hand to kiss. Then, by one of those wild caprices which made her so adorable and at the same time so dangerous, she had suddenly put her arm around his neck and kissed his forehead, saying, Vicomte, may my good wishes and this kiss bring you good fortune. Then she had pushed him away and directed the coachman to stop at the Hôtel de Luynes. The carriage had started, Madame de Chevreuse had made a parting gesture to the young man, and Raoul had returned in a state of stupefaction. Athos surmised what had taken place and smiled. Come, Vicomte, he said. It is time for you to go to bed. You will start in the morning for the army of Monsieur le Prince. Sleep well your last night as citizen. I am to be a soldier then, said the young man. Oh, monsieur, I thank you with all my heart. Adieu, Count, said the Abbé d'Herblay. I return to my convent. Adieu, Abbé, said the coadjutor. I am to preach tomorrow and have 20 texts to examine this evening. Adieu, gentlemen, said the Count. I am going to sleep 24 hours. I am just falling down with fatigue." The three men saluted one another, whilst exchanging a last look. Scarra followed their movements with a glance from the corner of his eye. "Not one of them will do as he says," he murmured, with his little monkey smile. "But they may do as they please, the brave gentlemen. Who knows if they will not manage to restore to me my pension? They can move their arms, they can, and that is much. Alas, I have only my tongue, but I will try to show that it is good for something. Ho there, Champenois. Here it is 11 o'clock. Come and roll me to bed. Really, that Demoiselle d'Aubagne is very charming." So the invalid disappeared soon afterward, and went into his sleeping room. And one by one the lights in the salon of the Rue de Tournelles were extinguished. Chapter 22. Saint Denis. The day had begun to break when Athos arose and dressed himself. It was plain, by a paleness still greater than usual, and by those traces which loss of sleep leaves on the face, that he must have passed almost the whole of the night without sleeping. Contrary to the custom of a man so firm and decided, there was this morning in his personal appearance something tardy and irresolute. He was occupied with the preparations for Raoul's departure, and was seeking to gain time. In the first place he himself furbished a sword, which he drew from its perfumed leather sheath. He examined it to see if its hilt was well guarded, and if the blade was firmly attached to the hilt. Then he placed at the bottom of the valise belonging to the young man a small bag of Louis, called Olivain, the lackey who had followed him from Blois, and made him pack the valise under his own eyes, watchful to see that everything should be put in which might be useful to a young man entering on his first campaign. At length, after occupying about an hour in these preparations, he opened the door of the room in which the Vicomte slept and entered. The sun, already high, penetrated into the room through the window, the curtains of which Raoul had neglected to close on the previous evening. He was still sleeping, his head gracefully reposing on his arm. Athos approached and hung over the youth in an attitude full of tender melancholy. He looked long on this young man, whose smiling mouth and half-closed eyes bespoke soft dreams and lightest slumber, as if his guardian angel watched over him with solicitude and affection. By degrees Athos gave himself up to the charms of his reverie in the proximity of youth, so pure, so fresh. His own youth seemed to reappear, bringing with it all those savory remembrances, which are like perfumes more than thoughts. Between the past and the present was an ineffable abyss. But imagination has the wings of an angel of light, and travels safely through or over the seas where we have been almost shipwrecked. The darkness in which our illusions are lost, the precipice whence our happiness has been hurled and swallowed up. He remembered that all the first part of his life had been embittered by a woman, and he thought with alarm of the influence love might assume over so fine, and at the same time so vigorous an organization as that of Raoul. In recalling all he had been through, he foresaw all that Raoul might suffer, and the expression of the deep and tender compassion which throbbed in his heart was pictured in the moist eye with which he gazed on the young man. At this moment Raoul awoke, without a cloud on his face, without weariness or lassitude. His eyes were fixed on those of Athos, and perhaps he comprehended all that passed in the heart of the man who was awaiting his awakening as a lover awaits the awakening of his mistress, for his glance, in return, had all the tenderness of love. "You are there, sir?" he said respectfully. "Yes, Raoul," replied the Count. "And you did not awaken me? I wished to leave you still to enjoy some moments of sleep, my child. You must be fatigued from yesterday." "Oh, sir, how good you are!" Athos smiled. "How do you feel this morning?" he inquired. "Perfectly well. Quite rested, sir." "You are still growing," Athos continued, with that charming and paternal interest felt by a grown man for a youth. "Oh, sir, I beg your pardon," exclaimed Raoul, ashamed of so much attention. "In an instant I shall be dressed." Athos then called Olivain. "Everything," said Olivain to Athos, "has been done according to your directions. The horses are waiting." "And I was asleep," cried Raoul. "Whilst you, sir, you had the kindness to attend to all these details. Truly, sir, you overwhelm me with benefits. Therefore you love me a little, I hope," replied Athos, in a tone of emotion. "Oh, sir, God knows how much I love, revere you." "See that you forget nothing," said Athos, appearing to look about him, that he might hide his emotion. "No, indeed, sir," answered Raoul. The servant then approached Athos and said, hesitatingly, Monsieur le Vicomte has no sword. 'Tis well, said Athos. I will take care of that. They went downstairs, Raoul looking every now and then at the Count to see if the moment of farewell was at hand. But Athos was silent. When they reached the steps, Raoul saw 3 horses. Oh, sir. Then you are going with me? I will accompany you a portion of the way, said Athos. Joy shone in Raoul's eyes and he leaped lightly to his saddle. Athos mounted more slowly, after speaking in a low voice to the lackey, who instead of following them immediately, returned to their rooms. Raoul, delighted at the Count's companionship, perceived, or affected to perceive nothing of this byplay. They set out, passing over the Pont Neuf. They pursued their way along the quay then called Le Brevoire Pepin, and went along by the walls of the Grand Châtelet. They proceeded to the Rue Saint-Denis. After passing through the Porte Saint-Denis, Athos looked at Raoul's way of riding and observed, "Take care, Raoul. I have already often told you of this. You must not forget it, for it is a great defect in a rider. See, your horse is tired already, he froths at the mouth, whilst mine looks as if he had only just left the stable. You hold the bit too tight, and so make his mouth hard, so that you will not be able to make him maneuver quickly. The safety of a cavalier often depends on the prompt obedience of his horse. In a week, remember, you will no longer be performing your maneuvers for practice, but on a field of battle." Then suddenly, in order not to give too uncomfortable an importance to this observation, "See, Raoul," he resumed. "What a fine plain for partridge shooting." The young man stored in his mind the admonition whilst he admired the delicate tenderness with which it was bestowed. "I have remarked also another thing," said Athos, "which is, that in firing off your pistol you hold your arm too far outstretched. This tension lessens the accuracy of the aim. So in 12 times you thrice missed the mark." "Which you, sir, struck 12 times, answered Raoul smiling. "Because I bent my arm and rested my hand on my elbow. So, do you understand what I mean?" "Yes, sir. I have fired since in that manner and have been quite successful." "What a cold wind," resumed Athos. "A wintry blast. Apropos, if you fire, and you will do so, for you are recommended to a young general who is very fond of powder, remember that in single combat, which often takes place in the cavalry, never to fire the first shot. He who fires the first shot rarely hits his man, for he fires with the apprehension of being disarmed, before an armed foe. Then, whilst he fires, make your horse rear. That maneuver has saved my life several times." "I shall do so, if only in gratitude." "Eh," cried Athos. "Are not those fellows poachers they have arrested yonder?" "They are." "Then another important thing, Raoul. Should you be wounded in a battle, and fall from your horse, if you have any strength left, disentangle yourself from the line that your regiment has formed. Otherwise, it may be driven back and you will be trampled to death by the horses. At all events, should you be wounded, write to me that very instant, or get someone at once to write to me. We are judges of wounds, we old soldiers," Athos added smiling. "Thank you, sir," answered the young man much moved. They arrived that very moment at the gate of the town, guarded by 2 sentinels. "Here comes a young gentleman," said one of them, "who seems as if he were going to join the army." "How do you make that out?" inquired Athos. "By his manner, sir, and his age. He's the second today." "Has a young man such as I am gone through this morning then?" asked Raoul. "Faith, yes, with a haughty presence, a fine equipage, such as the son of a noble house would have." "He will be my companion on the journey, sir," cried Raoul. "Alas! He cannot make me forget what I shall have lost." Thus talking, they traversed the streets, full of people on account of the fete, and arrived opposite the old cathedral, where first mass was going on. "Let us alight, Raoul," said Athos. "Olivain, take care of our horses and give me my sword." The 2 gentlemen then went into the church. Athos gave Raoul some of the holy water. A love as tender as that of a lover for his mistress dwells, undoubtedly, in some paternal hearts toward a son. Athos said a word to one of the vergers, who bowed and proceeded toward the basement. "Come, Raoul," he said. "Let us follow this man." The verger opened the iron grating that guarded the royal tombs, and stood on the topmost step, whilst Athos and Raoul descended. The sepulchral depths of the descent were dimly lighted by a silver lamp on the lowest step. And just below this lamp there was laid, wrapped in a flowing mantle of violet velvet, worked with fleurs-de-lis of gold, a catafalque resting on trestles of oak. The young man, prepared for this scene by the state of his own feelings, which were mournful, and by the majesty of the cathedral which he had passed through, descended in a slow and solemn manner, and stood with head uncovered before these mortal spoils of the last king, who was not to be placed by the side of his forefathers until his successor should take his place there, and who appeared to abide on that spot, that he might thus address human pride, so sure to be exalted by the glories of a throne. Dust of the earth, here I await thee. There was profound silence. Then Athos raised his hand and pointing to the coffin, "This temporary sepulture is," he said, "that of a man who was of feeble mind, yet one whose reign was full of great events, because over this king watched the spirit of another man, even as this lamp keeps vigil over this coffin and illumines it. He whose intellect was thus supreme, Raoul, was the actual sovereign. The other, nothing but a phantom to whom he lent a soul. And yet, so powerful is majesty amongst us, this man has not even the honor of a tomb at the feet of him in whose service his life was worn away. Remember, Raoul, this. If Richelieu made the king, by comparison, seem small, he made royalty great. The palace of the Louvre contains two things: the king who must die, and royalty, which never dies. The minister, so feared, so hated by his master, has descended into the tomb, drawing after him the king, whom he would not leave alone on earth, lest his work should be destroyed. So blind were his contemporaries that they regarded the cardinal's death as a deliverance. And I, even I, opposed the designs of the great man who held the destinies of France within the hollow of his hand. Raoul, learn how to distinguish the king from royalty. The king is but a man, royalty is the gift of God. Whenever you hesitate as to whom you ought to serve, abandon the exterior, the material appearance for the invisible principle, for the invisible principle is everything. Raoul, I seem to read your future destiny as through a cloud. It will be happier, I think, than ours has been. Different in your fate from us. You will have a king without a minister, whom you may serve, love, respect. Should the king prove a tyrant, for power begets tyranny, serve, love, respect royalty, that divine right, that celestial spark which makes this dust still powerful and holy, so that we, gentlemen nevertheless of rank and condition, are as nothing in comparison with the cold corpse there extended. I shall adore God, sir, said Raoul. Respect royalty and ever serve the king. And if death be my lot, I hope to die for the king, for royalty and for God. Have I, sir, comprehended your instructions? Athos smiled. Yours is a noble nature, he said. Here is your sword. Raoul bent his knee to the ground. It was worn by my father, a loyal gentleman. I have worn it in my turn, and it has sometimes not been disgraced when the hilt was in my hand and the sheath at my side. Should your hand still be too weak to use this sword, Raoul, so much the better. You will have the more time to learn to draw it only when it ought to be used. Sir, replied Raoul, putting the sword to his lips as he received it from the count, I owe you everything, and yet this sword is the most precious gift you have yet made me. I will wear it, I swear to you, as a grateful man should do. 'Tis well, arise, Vicomte, embrace me. Raoul arose and threw himself with emotion into the count's arms. Adieu, faltered the count, who felt his heart die away within him. Adieu, and think of me. Oh, forever and ever, cried the youth. Oh, I swear to you, sir, should any harm befall me, your name will be the last name that I shall utter, the remembrance of you my last thought. Athos hastened upstairs to conceal his emotion, and regained with hurried steps the porch where Olivain was waiting with the horses. Olivain, said Athos, showing the servant Raoul's shoulder belt, tighten the buckle of the sword, it falls too low. You will accompany Monsieur le Vicomte till Grimaud rejoins you. You know, Raoul, Grimaud is an old and zealous servant. He will follow you. Yes, sir, answered Raoul. Now to horse, that I may see you depart. Raoul obeyed. Adieu, Raoul, said the count. Adieu, my dearest boy. Adieu, sir, adieu, my beloved protector. Athos waved his hand. He dared not trust himself to speak. And Raoul went away, his head uncovered. Athos remained motionless, looking after him until he turned the corner of the street. Then the count threw the bridle of his horse into the hands of a peasant, remounted the steps, went into the cathedral, there to kneel down in the darkest corner and pray. Chapter 23. One of the 40 methods of escape of the Duc de Beaufort. Meanwhile, time was passing on for the prisoner, as well as for those who were preparing his escape. Only for him it passed more slowly. Unlike other men, who enter with ardor upon a perilous resolution and grow cold as the moment of execution approaches, the Duc de Beaufort, whose buoyant courage had become a proverb, seemed to push time before him and sought most eagerly to hasten the hour of action. In his escape alone, apart from his plans for the future, which it must be admitted, were for the present sufficiently vague and uncertain, there was a beginning of vengeance which filled his heart. In the first place, his escape would be a serious misfortune to Monsieur de Chavigny, whom he hated for the petty persecutions he owed to him. It would be a still worse affair for Mazarin, whom he execrated for the greater offenses he had committed. It may be observed that there was a proper proportion in his sentiments toward the governor of the prison and the minister, toward the subordinate and the master. Then Monsieur de Beaufort, who was so familiar with the interior of the Palais Royal, though he did not know the relations existing between the Queen and the Cardinal, pictured to himself, in his prison, all that dramatic excitement which would ensue when the rumor should run from the minister's cabinet to the chamber of Anne of Austria. Monsieur de Beaufort has escaped. Whilst saying that to himself, Monsieur de Beaufort smiled pleasantly and imagined himself already outside, breathing the air of the plains and the forests, pressing a strong horse between his knees and crying out in a loud voice, "I am free." It is true that on coming to himself he found that he was still within 4 walls. He saw Aramis twirling his thumbs 10 feet from him, and his guards laughing and drinking in the antechamber. The only thing that was pleasant to him in that odious tableau, such is the instability of the human mind, was the sullen face of Grimaud, for whom he had at first conceived such a hatred, and who now was all his hope. Grimaud seemed to him an Antinous. It is needless to say that this transformation was visible only to the prisoner's feverish imagination. Grimaud was still the same, and therefore he retained the entire confidence of his superior, Aramis, who now relied upon him more than he did upon himself, for as we have said, Aramis felt at the bottom of his heart a certain weakness for Monsieur de Beaufort. And so the good Aramis made a festivity of the little supper with his prisoner. He had but one fault: he was a gourmand. He had found the pâtés good, the wine excellent. Now the successor of Père Marteau had promised him a pâté of pheasant instead of a pâté of fowl, and Chambertin wine instead of Macon. All this, set off by the presence of that excellent prince, who was so good-natured, who invented so droll tricks against Monsieur de Chavigny and so fine jokes against Mazarin, made for Aramis the approaching Pentecost one of the 4 great feasts of the year. He therefore looked forward to 6 o'clock with as much impatience as the Duke himself. Since daybreak Aramis had been occupied with the preparations, and trusting no one but himself, he had visited personally the successor of Père Marteau. The latter had surpassed himself. He showed Aramis a monstrous pâté, ornamented with Monsieur de Beaufort's coat of arms. It was empty as yet, but a pheasant and 2 partridges were lying near it. Aramis's mouth watered, and he returned to the Duke's chamber rubbing his hands. To crown his happiness, Monsieur de Chavigny had started on a journey that morning, and in his absence Aramis was deputy governor of the château. As for Grimaud, he seemed more sullen than ever. In the course of the forenoon Monsieur de Beaufort had a game of tennis with Aramis. A sign from Grimaud put him on the alert. Grimaud, going in advance, followed the course which they were to take in the evening. The game was played in an enclosure called the Little Court of the Château, a place quite deserted except when Monsieur de Beaufort was playing. And even then the precaution seemed superfluous, the wall was so high. There were 3 gates to open before reaching the enclosure, each by a different key. When they arrived Grimaud went carelessly and sat down by a loophole in the wall, letting his legs dangle outside. It was evident that there the rope ladder was to be attached. This maneuver, transparent to the Duc de Beaufort, was quite unintelligible to Aramis. The game at tennis, which upon a sign from Grimaud, Monsieur de Beaufort had consented to play, began in the afternoon. The Duke was in full strength and beat Aramis completely. 4 of the guards, who were constantly near the prisoner, assisted in picking up the tennis balls. When the game was over the Duke, laughing at Aramis for his bad play, offered these men 2 louis d'or to go and drink his health, with their 4 other comrades. The guards asked permission of La Ramee, who gave it to them, but not till the evening, however. Until then he had business and the prisoner was not to be left alone. 6 o'clock came and, although they were not to sit down to table until 7 o'clock, dinner was ready and served up. Upon a sideboard appeared the colossal pie with the Duke's arms on it, and seemingly cooked to a turn, as far as one could judge by the golden color which illuminated the crust. The rest of the dinner was to come. Every one was impatient, La Ramee to sit down to table, the guards to go and drink, the Duke to escape. Grimaud alone was calm as ever. One might have fancied that Athos had educated him with the express forethought of such a great event. There were moments when, looking at Grimaud, the Duke asked himself if he was not dreaming, and if that marble figure was really at his service, and would grow animated when the moment came for action. La Ramee sent away the guards, desiring them to drink to the Duke's health, and as soon as they were gone shut all the doors, put the keys in his pocket and showed the table to the prince with an air that signified, "Whenever my lord pleases." The prince looked at Grimaud, Grimaud looked at the clock. It was hardly 6:15. The escape was fixed to take place at 7 o'clock. There was therefore 3/4 of an hour to wait. The Duke, in order to pass away another 1/4 of an hour, pretended to be reading something that interested him, and muttered that he wished they would allow him to finish his chapter. La Ramee went up to him and looked over his shoulder to see what sort of a book it was that had so singular an influence over the prisoner, as to make him put off taking his dinner. It was Caesar's Commentaries, which La Ramee had lent him, contrary to the orders of the governor, and La Ramee resolved never again to disobey these injunctions. Meantime he uncorked the bottles and went to smell if the pie was good. At 6:30 the Duke arose and said very gravely, "Certainly Caesar was the greatest man of ancient times." "You think so, my lord?" answered La Ramee. "Yes." "Well, as for me, I prefer Hannibal." "And why, pray, Master La Ramee?" asked the Duke. "Because he left no commentaries," replied La Ramee, with his coarse laugh. The Duke vouchsafed no reply, but sitting down at the table made a sign that La Ramee should seat himself opposite. There is nothing so expressive as the face of an epicure who finds himself before a well-spread table. So La Ramee, when receiving his plate of soup from Grimaud, presented a type of perfect bliss. The Duke smiled. "Zounds," he said, "I don't suppose there is a more contented man at this moment in all the kingdom than yourself." "You are right, my Lord Duke," answered the officer. "I don't know any pleasanter sight on earth than a well-covered table, and when added to that, he who does the honors is the grandson of Henry IV. You will, my Lord Duke, easily comprehend that the honor fairly doubles the pleasure one enjoys." The Duke in his turn bowed, and an imperceptible smile appeared on the face of Grimaud, who kept behind La Ramee. "My dear La Ramee," said the Duke, "you are the only man to turn such faultless compliments." "No, my Lord Duke," replied La Ramee in the fullness of his heart. "I say what I think. There is no compliment in what I say to you." "Then you are attached to me?" asked the Duke. "To own the truth, I should be inconsolable if you were to leave Vincennes. A droll way of showing your affliction." The Duke meant to say affection. "But, my lord," returned La Ramee, "what would you do if you got out? Every folly you committed would embroil you with the court, and they would put you into the Bastille, instead of Vincennes. Now Monsieur de Chavigny is not amiable, I allow, but Monsieur du Tremblay is considerably worse." "Indeed!" exclaimed the Duke, who from time to time looked at the clock, the fingers of which seemed to move with sickening slowness. "But what can you expect from the brother of a Capuchin monk, brought up in the school of Cardinal Richelieu? Ah, my lord, it is a great happiness that the Queen, who always wished you well, had a fancy to send you here, where there's a promenade and a tennis court, good air, and a good table." "In short," answered the Duke, "if I comprehend you aright, La Ramee, I am ungrateful for having ever thought of leaving this place?" "Oh, my Lord Duke, 'tis the height of ingratitude, but your Highness has never seriously thought of it." "Yes," returned the Duke, "I must confess I sometimes think of it." "Still by one of your 40 methods, your Highness?" "Yes, yes, indeed." "My lord," said La Ramee, "now we are quite at our ease and enjoying ourselves, pray tell me one of those 40 ways invented by your Highness." "Willingly," answered the Duke. "Give me the pie." "I am listening," said La Ramee, leaning back in his armchair and raising his glass of Madeira to his lips, and winking his eye that he might see the sun through the rich liquid that he was about to taste. The Duke glanced at the clock. In 10 minutes it would strike 7. Grimaud placed the pie before the Duke, who took a knife with a silver blade to raise the upper crust, but La Ramee, who was afraid of any harm happening to this fine work of art, passed his knife, which had an iron blade, to the Duke. "Thank you, La Ramee," said the prisoner. "Well, my lord, this famous invention of yours." "Must I tell you," replied the Duke, "on what I most reckon and what I determined to try first?" "Yes, that's the thing, my lord," cried his custodian gaily. "Well, I should hope, in the first instance, to have for keeper an honest fellow like you. And you have me, my lord. Well, having then a keeper like La Ramee, I should try also to have introduced to him by some friend or other a man who would be devoted to me, who would assist me in my flight." "Come, come," said La Ramee. "That's not a bad idea." "Capital, isn't it? For instance, the former serving man of some brave gentleman, an enemy himself to Mazarin, as every gentleman ought to be." "Hush! Don't let us talk politics, my lord. Then my keeper would begin to trust this man and to depend upon him, and I should have news from those without the prison walls." "Ah yes, but how can the news be brought to you?" "Nothing easier. In a game of tennis, for example." "In a game of tennis?" asked La Ramee, giving more serious attention to the Duke's words. "Yes, see, I send a ball into the moat. A man is there who picks it up. The ball contains a letter. Instead of returning the ball to me when I call for it from the top of the wall, he throws me another. That other ball contains a letter. Thus we have exchanged ideas and no one has seen us do it." "The devil it does. The devil it does," said La Ramee, scratching his head. "You are in the wrong to tell me that, my lord. I shall have to watch the men who pick up balls." The Duke smiled. "But," resumed La Ramee, "that is only a way of corresponding. And that is a great deal, it seems to me. But not enough. Pardon me. For instance, I say to my friends, be on a certain day on a certain hour, at the other side of the moat with 2 horses. Well, what then?" La Ramee began to be uneasy. "Unless the horses have wings to mount the ramparts and come and fetch you." "That's not needed." "I have," replied the Duke, "a way of descending from the ramparts." "What? A rope ladder?" "Yes, but," answered La Ramee, trying to laugh, "a ladder of ropes can't be sent around a ball, like a letter." "No, but it may be sent in something else." "In something else? In something else? In what?" "In a pâté, for example." "In a pâté?" said La Ramee. "Yes. Let us suppose one thing," replied the Duke. "Let us suppose, for instance, that my maitre d'hôtel Noirmont has purchased the shop of Père Marteau." "Well," said La Ramee, shuddering. "Well, La Ramee, who is a gourmand, sees his pâtés, thinks them more attractive than those of Père Marteau and proposes to me that I shall try them. I consent on condition that La Ramee tries them with me. That we may be more at our ease, La Ramee removes the guards, keeping only Grimaud to wait on us. Grimaud is the man whom a friend has sent to second me in everything. The moment for my escape is fixed 7 o'clock. Well, at a few minutes to 7. "At a few minutes to 7? cried La Ramee, cold sweat upon his brow. "At a few minutes to 7, returned the Duke, suiting the action to the words. "I raise the crust of the pie. I find in it 2 poniards, a ladder of rope, and a gag. I point one of the poniards at La Ramee's breast and I say to him, 'My friend, I am sorry for it, but if thou stirrest, if thou utterest one cry, thou art a dead man.'" The Duke, in pronouncing these words, suited, as we have said, the action to the words. He was standing near the officer, and he directed the point of the poniard in such a manner, close to La Ramee's heart, that there could be no doubt in the mind of that individual as to his determination. Meanwhile, Grimaud, still mute as ever, drew from the pie the other poniard, the rope ladder and the gag. La Ramee followed all these objects with his eyes, his alarm every moment increasing. "Oh, my lord," he cried, with an expression of stupefaction in his face. "You haven't the heart to kill me." "No, not if thou dost not oppose my flight." "But, my lord, if I allow you to escape I am a ruined man." "I will compensate thee for the loss of thy place." "You are determined to leave the chateau?" "By heaven and earth." This night I am determined to be free. And if I defend myself or call, or cry out, I will kill thee, on the honor of a gentleman." At this moment the clock struck. 7 o'clock, said Grimaud, who had not spoken a word. La Ramee made one movement, in order to satisfy his conscience. The Duke frowned. The officer felt the point of the poniard, which, having penetrated through his clothes, was close to his heart. "Let us dispatch," said the Duke. "My lord, one last favor." "What?" "Speak, make haste." "Bind my arms, my lord, fast." "Why bind thee?" "That I may not be considered as your accomplice." "Your hands?" asked Grimaud. "Not before me, behind me." "But with what?" asked the Duke. "With your belt, my lord," replied La Ramee. The Duke undid his belt and gave it to Grimaud, who tied La Ramee in such a way as to satisfy him. "Your feet too," said Grimaud. La Ramee stretched out his legs. Grimaud took a tablecloth, tore it into strips and tied La Ramee's feet together. "Now, my lord," said the poor man, "let me have the poire d'angoisse. I ask for it. Without it I should be tried in a court of justice because I did not raise the alarm. Thrust it into my mouth, my lord, thrust it in." Grimaud prepared to comply with this request, when the officer made a sign as if he had something to say. "Speak," said the Duke. "Now, my lord, do not forget, if any harm happens to me on your account, that I have a wife and 4 children. Rest assured, put the gag in, Grimaud." In a second La Ramee was gagged and laid prostrate. 2 or 3 chairs were thrown down as if there had been a struggle. Grimaud then took from the pocket of the officer all the keys it contained and first opened the door of the room in which they were, then shut it and double-locked it, and both he and the Duke proceeded rapidly down the gallery which led to the little enclosure. At last they reached the tennis court. It was completely deserted. No sentinels, no one at any of the windows. The Duke ran to the rampart, and perceived on the other side of the ditch 3 cavaliers with 2 riding horses. The Duke exchanged a signal with them. It was indeed for him that they were there. Grimaud, meantime, undid the means of escape. This was not, however, a rope ladder, but a ball of silk cord, with a narrow board which was to pass between the legs, the ball to unwind itself by the weight of the person who sat astride upon the board. "Go," said the Duke. "First, my lord?" inquired Grimaud. "Certainly. If I am caught, I risk nothing but being taken back again to prison. If they catch thee, thou wilt be hung." "True," replied Grimaud. And instantly, Grimaud, sitting upon the board as if on horseback, commenced his perilous descent. The Duke followed him with his eyes, with involuntary terror. He had gone down about 3/4 of the length of the wall when the cord broke. Grimaud fell, precipitated into the moat. The Duke uttered a cry, but Grimaud did not give a single moan. He must have been dreadfully hurt, for he did not stir from the place where he fell. Immediately one of the men who were waiting slipped down into the moat, tied under Grimaud's shoulders the end of a cord, and the remaining 2, who held the other end, drew Grimaud to them. "Descend, my lord," said the man in the moat. "There are only 15 feet more from the top down here, and the grass is soft." The Duke had already begun to descend. His task was the more difficult, as there was no board to support him. He was obliged to let himself down by his hands, and from a height of 50 feet. But as we have said, he was active, strong, and full of presence of mind. In less than 5 minutes he arrived at the end of the cord. He was then only 15 feet from the ground, as the gentleman below had told him. He let go the rope and fell upon his feet, without receiving any injury. He instantly began to climb up the slope of the moat, on the top of which he met de Rochefort. The other 2 gentlemen were unknown to him. Grimaud, in a swoon, was tied securely to a horse. "Gentlemen," said the Duke, "I will thank you later. Now we have not a moment to lose. On then, on. Those who love me follow me." And he jumped on his horse and set off at full gallop, snuffing the fresh air in his triumph and shouting out, with an expression of face which it would be impossible to describe, "Free! Free! Free!" Chapter 24. The timely arrival of D'Artagnan in Paris. At Blois, D'Artagnan received the money paid to him by Mazarin for any future service he might render the cardinal. From Blois to Paris was a journey of 4 days for ordinary travelers, but D'Artagnan arrived on the 3rd day at the Barrière Saint-Denis. In turning the corner of the Rue Montmartre, In order to reach the Rue Tiqueton and the Hôtel de la Chevrette, where he had appointed Porthos to meet him, he saw at one of the windows of the hotel that friend himself dressed in a sky-blue waistcoat, embroidered with silver, and gaping, till he showed every one of his white teeth, whilst the people passing by admiringly gazed at this gentleman, so handsome and so rich, who seemed to weary of his riches and his greatness. D'Artagnan and Planchet had hardly turned the corner, when Porthos recognized them. D'Artagnan, he cried. Thank God you have come. Good day, dear friend, replied D'Artagnan. Porthos came down at once to the threshold of the hotel. Ah, my dear friend, he cried. What bad stabling for my horses here. Indeed, said D'Artagnan. I am most unhappy to hear it, on account of those fine animals. And I was also wretchedly off, he answered, moving backward and forward as he spoke. And had it not been for the hostess, he added, with his air of vulgar self-complacency, who is very agreeable and understands a joke, I should have got a lodging elsewhere. The pretty Madeleine, who had approached during this colloquy, stepped back and turned pale as death on hearing Porthos's words, for she thought the scene with the Swiss was about to be repeated. But to her great surprise D'Artagnan remained perfectly calm, and instead of being angry he laughed, and said to Porthos, Yes, I understand, the air of La Rue Tiqueton is not like that of Pierrefonds, but console yourself, I will soon conduct you to one much better. When will you do that? Immediately, I hope. Ah, so much the better. To that exclamation of Porthos's succeeded a groaning, low and profound, which seemed to come from behind a door. D'Artagnan, who had just dismounted, then saw, outlined against the wall, the enormous stomach of Mousqueton, whose down-drawn mouth emitted sounds of distress. And you too, my poor Monsieur Mouston, are out of place in this poor hotel, are you not? Asked D'Artagnan, in that rallying tone which may indicate either compassion or mockery. He finds the cooking detestable, replied Porthos. Why then doesn't he attend to it himself, as at Chantilly? Ah, monsieur, I have not here, as I had there, the ponds of Monsieur le Prince, where I could catch those beautiful carp, nor the forests of his highness to provide me with partridges. As for the cellar, I have searched every part and poor stuff I found. Monsieur Mouston, said D'Artagnan, I should indeed condole with you had I not at this moment something very pressing to attend to. Then taking Porthos aside, My dear Du Vallon, he said, here you are in full dress most fortunately, for I am going to take you to the cardinal's. Gracious me! Really? Exclaimed Porthos, opening his great wondering eyes. Yes, my friend. A presentation? Indeed. Does that alarm you? No, but it agitates me. Oh, don't be distressed. You have to deal with a cardinal of another kind. This one will not oppress you by his dignity. 'Tis the same thing, you understand me, D'Artagnan, a court. There's no court now. Alas! The queen. I was going to say, there's no longer a queen. The queen. Rest assured, we shall not see her. And you say that we are going from here to the Palais Royal? Immediately. Only, that there may be no delay, I shall borrow one of your horses. Certainly. All the four are at your service. Oh, I need only one of them for the time being. Shall we take our valets? Yes, you may as well take Mousqueton. As to Planchet, he has certain reasons for not going to court. And what are they? Oh, he doesn't stand well with his eminence. Mouston, said Porthos, saddle Vulcan and Bayard. And for myself, monsieur, shall I saddle Rustad? No, take a more stylish horse, Phoebus or Superbe. We are going with some ceremony. Ah, said Mousqueton, breathing more freely. You are only going then to make a visit? Oh, yes, of course, Mouston, nothing else. But to avoid risk, put the pistols in the holsters. You will find mine on my saddle, already loaded. Mouston breathed a sigh. He couldn't understand visits of ceremony made under arms. Indeed, said Porthos, looking complacently at his old lackey as he went away. You are right, D'Artagnan. Mouston will do. Mouston has a very fine appearance. D'Artagnan smiled. But you, my friend, are you not going to change your dress? No, I shall go as I am. This traveling dress will serve to show the cardinal my haste to obey his commands. They set out on Vulcan and Bayard, followed by Mousqueton on Phoebus, and arrived at the Palais Royal at about 6:45. The streets were crowded, for it was the day of Pentecost, and the crowd looked in wonder at these two cavaliers, one as fresh as if he had come out of a bandbox, the other so covered with dust that he looked as if he had but just come off a field of battle. Musketeer also attracted attention, and as the romance of Don Quixote was then the fashion, they said that he was Sancho, who after having lost one master, had found two. On reaching the palace, D'Artagnan sent to his eminence the letter in which he had been ordered to return without delay. He was soon ordered to the presence of the cardinal. "Courage," he whispered to Porthos, as they proceeded. "Do not be intimidated. Believe me, the eye of the eagle is closed forever. We have only the vulture to deal with. Hold yourself as bolt upright as on the day of the bastion of Saint Gervais, and do not bow too low to this Italian. That might give him a poor idea of you." "Good," answered Porthos. "Good." Mazarin was in his study, working at a list of pensions and benefices, of which he was trying to reduce the number. He saw D'Artagnan and Porthos enter with internal pleasure, yet showed no joy in his countenance. "Ah, you is it, Monsieur le Lieutenant, you have been very prompt. 'Tis well. Welcome to ye." "Thanks, my lord. Here I am at your eminence's service, as well as Monsieur du Vallon, one of my old friends, who used to conceal his nobility under the name of Porthos." Porthos bowed to the cardinal. "A magnificent cavalier," remarked Mazarin. Porthos turned his head to the right and to the left, and drew himself up with a movement full of dignity. "The best swordsman in the kingdom, my lord," said D'Artagnan. Porthos bowed to his friend. Mazarin was as fond of fine soldiers as, in later times, Frederick of Prussia used to be. He admired the strong hands, the broad shoulders and the steady eye of Porthos. He seemed to see before him the salvation of his administration and of the kingdom, sculptured in flesh and bone. He remembered that the old association of musketeers was composed of 4 persons. "And your 2 other friends?" he asked. Porthos opened his mouth, thinking it a good opportunity to put in a word in his turn. D'Artagnan checked him by a glance from the corner of his eye. "They are prevented at this moment, but will join us later." Mazarin coughed a little. "And this gentleman, being disengaged, takes to the service willingly?" he asked. "Yes, my lord, and from pure devotion to the cause, for Monsieur de Bracieux is rich." "Rich," said Mazarin, whom that single word always inspired with a great respect. 50,000 francs a year," said Porthos. These were the first words he had spoken. "From pure zeal," resumed Mazarin with his artful smile. "From pure zeal and devotion, then?" "My lord has perhaps no faith in those words," said D'Artagnan. "Have you, Monsieur le Gascon?" asked Mazarin, supporting his elbows on his desk and his chin on his hands. "Aye," replied the Gascon. "I believe in devotion as a word at one's baptism, for instance, which naturally comes before one's proper name. Everyone is naturally more or less devout, certainly, but there should be at the end of one's devotion something to gain." "And your friend, for instance, what does he expect to have at the end of his devotion?" "Well, my lord, my friend has 3 magnificent estates, that of Vallon at Corbeil, that of Bracieux in the Soissonnais, and that of Pierrefonds in the Valois. Now, my lord, he would like to have one of his 3 estates erected into a barony." "Only that," said Mazarin, his eyes twinkling with joy on seeing that he could pay for Porthos's devotion without opening his purse. "Only that? That can be managed." "I shall be baron," explained Porthos, stepping forward. "I told you so," said D'Artagnan, checking him with his hand, "and now his eminence confirms it. And you, Monsieur d'Artagnan, what do you want?" "My lord," said D'Artagnan, "it is 20 years since Cardinal de Richelieu made me lieutenant." "Yes, and you would be gratified if Cardinal Mazarin should make you captain." D'Artagnan bowed. "Well, that is not impossible. We will see, gentlemen, we will see. Now, Monsieur de Vallon," said Mazarin, "what service do you prefer, in the town or in the country?" Porthos opened his mouth to reply. "My lord," said D'Artagnan, "Monsieur de Vallon is like me, he prefers service extraordinary, that is to say, enterprises that are considered mad and impossible." That boastfulness was not displeasing to Mazarin. He fell into meditation. "And yet," he said, "I must admit that I sent for you to appoint you to quiet service. I have certain apprehensions. Well, What is the meaning of that? In fact, a great noise was heard in the antechamber. At the same time the door of the study was burst open and a man, covered with dust, rushed into it, exclaiming, "My lord the cardinal! My lord the cardinal!" Mazarin thought that someone was going to assassinate him, and he drew back, pushing his chair on the casters. D'Artagnan and Porthos moved so as to plant themselves between the person entering and the cardinal. "Well, sir," exclaimed Mazarin, "what's the matter? And why do you rush in here, as if you were about to penetrate a crowded marketplace?" "My lord," replied the messenger, "I wish to speak to your eminence in secret. I am Monsieur Dupoins, an officer in the guards, on duty at the dungeon of Vincennes." Mazarin, perceiving by the paleness and agitation of the messenger that he had something of importance to say, made a sign that D'Artagnan and Porthos should give place. D'Artagnan and Porthos withdrew to a corner of the cabinet. "Speak, monsieur, speak at once," said Mazarin. "What is the matter?" "The matter is, my lord, that the Duc de Beaufort has contrived to escape from the chateau of Vincennes." Mazarin uttered a cry and became paler than the man who had brought the news. He fell back, almost fainting in his chair. "Escaped? Monsieur de Beaufort escaped?" "My lord, I saw him run off from the top of the terrace." "And you did not fire on him?" "He was out of range." "Monsieur de Chavigny, where was he?" "Absent." "And La Ramee?" "Was found locked up in the prisoner's room, a gag in his mouth and a poniard near him." "But the man who was under him?" "Was an accomplice of the Duke's and escaped along with him." Mazarin groaned. "My lord," said D'Artagnan, advancing toward the cardinal, "it seems to me that your eminence is losing precious time. It may still be possible to overtake the prisoner. France is large. The nearest frontier is 60 leagues distant." "And who is to pursue him?" cried Mazarin. "I pardieu. And you would arrest him?" "Why not? You would arrest the Duc de Beaufort armed in the field? If your eminence should order me to arrest the devil, I would seize him by the horns and would bring him in." "So would I," said Porthos. "So would you," said Mazarin, looking with astonishment at those two men. "But the Duke will not yield himself without a furious battle." "Very well," said D'Artagnan, his eyes aflame. "Battle? It is a long time since we have had a battle, Porthos." "Battle?" cried Porthos. "And you think you can catch him?" "Yes, if we are better mounted than he." "Go then, take what guards you find here and pursue him." "You command us, my lord, to do so?" "And I sign my orders," said Mazarin, taking a piece of paper and writing some lines. "Monsieur du Vallon, your barony is on the back of the Duc de Beaufort's horse. You have nothing to do but to overtake it. As for you, my dear lieutenant, I promise you nothing, but if you bring him back to me, dead or alive, you may ask all you wish." "To horse, Porthos," said D'Artagnan, taking his friend by the hand. "Here I am," smiled Porthos with his sublime composure. They descended the great staircase, taking with them all the guards they found on their road, and crying out, "To arms! To arms!" and immediately put spur to horse, which set off along the Rue Saint-Honoré with the speed of the whirlwind. "Well, Baron, I promise you some good exercise," said the Gascon. "Yes, my captain." As they went, the citizens, awakened, left their doors and the street dogs followed the cavaliers, barking. At the corner of the Cimetière Saint-Jean, D'Artagnan upset a man. It was too insignificant an occurrence to delay people so eager to get on. The troop continued its course as though their steeds had wings. Alas! There are no unimportant events in this world, and we shall see that this apparently slight incident came near endangering the monarchy. Chapter 25. An adventure on the high road. The Musketeers rode the whole length of the Faubourg Saint-Antoine and of the road to Vincennes, and soon found themselves out of the town, then in a forest and then within sight of a village. The horses seemed to become more lively with each successive step. Their nostrils reddened like glowing furnaces. D'Artagnan, freely applying his spurs, was in advance of Porthos 2 feet at the most. Mousqueton followed 2 lengths behind. The guards were scattered according to the varying excellence of their respective mounts. From the top of an eminence D'Artagnan perceived a group of people collected on the other side of the moat, in front of that part of the dungeon which looks toward Saint-Maur. He rode on, convinced that in this direction he would gain intelligence of the fugitive. In 5 minutes he had arrived at the place, where the guards joined him, coming up one by one. The several members of that group were much excited. They looked at the cord, still hanging from the loophole, and broken at about 20 feet from the ground. Their eyes measured the height and they exchanged conjectures. On the top of the wall sentinels went and came with a frightened air. A few soldiers, commanded by a sergeant, drove away idlers from the place where the Duke had mounted his horse. D'Artagnan went straight to the sergeant. "My officer," said the sergeant, "it is not permitted to stop here." "That prohibition is not for me," said D'Artagnan. "Have the fugitives been pursued?" "Yes, my officer. Unfortunately, they are well mounted." "How many are there?" "4, and a 5th whom they carried away wounded." "4," said D'Artagnan, looking at Porthos. "Do you hear, Baron? They are only 4. A joyous smile lighted Porthos's face. "How long a start have they?" 2 hours and a quarter, my officer." 2 hours and a quarter? That is nothing. We are well mounted, are we not, Porthos? Porthos breathed a sigh. He thought of what was in store for his poor horses. "Very good," said D'Artagnan. "And now in what direction did they set out?" "That I am forbidden to tell." D'Artagnan drew from his pocket a paper. "Order of the king," he said. "Speak to the governor, then." "And where is the governor?" "In the country." Anger mounted to D'Artagnan's face. He frowned and his cheeks were colored. "Ah, you scoundrel," he said to the sergeant. "I believe you are impudent to me. Wait." He unfolded the paper, presented it to the sergeant with one hand, and with the other took a pistol from his holsters and cocked it. "Order of the king, I tell you. Read and answer, or I will blow out your brains." The sergeant saw that D'Artagnan was in earnest. "The Vendemois road," he replied. "And by what gate did they go out?" "By the St. Maur gate." "If you are deceiving me, rascal, you will be hanged tomorrow." "And if you catch up with them you won't come back to hang me," murmured the sergeant. D'Artagnan shrugged his shoulders, made a sign to his escort and started. "This way, gentlemen, this way," he cried, directing his course toward the gate that had been pointed out. But now that the Duke had escaped, the concierge had seen fit to fasten the gate with a double lock. It was necessary to compel him to open it, as the sergeant had been compelled to speak, and this took another 10 minutes. This last obstacle having been overcome, the troop pursued their course with their accustomed ardor, but some of the horses could no longer sustain this pace. 3 of them stopped after an hour's gallop and 1 fell down. D'Artagnan, who never turned his head, did not perceive it. Porthos told him of it in his calm manner. "If only we 2 arrive," said D'Artagnan. "It will be enough since the Duke's troop are only 4 in number." "That is true," said Porthos. And he spurred his courser on. At the end of another 2 hours the horses had gone 12 leagues without stopping. Their legs began to tremble, and the foam they shed whitened the doublets of their masters. "Let us rest here an instant to give these poor creatures breathing time," said Porthos. "Let us rather kill them." "Yes, kill them," cried D'Artagnan. "I see fresh tracks. 'Tis not a quarter of an hour since they passed this place." In fact, the road was trodden by horses' feet, visible even in the approaching gloom of evening. They set out. After a run of 2 leagues, Mousqueton's horse sank. "Gracious me," said Porthos, "there's Phoebus ruined. The cardinal will pay you 100 pistoles." "I'm above that. Let us set out again at full gallop." "Yes, if we can." But at last the lieutenant's horse refused to go on. He could not breathe. One last spur, instead of making him advance, made him fall. "The devil!" exclaimed Porthos. "There's Vulcan foundered." "Zounds!" cried D'Artagnan. "Then we must stop. Give me your horse, Porthos." "What the devil are you doing?" "By Jove, I am falling, or rather, Bayard is falling," answered Porthos. All 3 then cried, "All's over." "Hush," said D'Artagnan. "What is it?" "I hear a horse." "It belongs to one of our companions, who is overtaking us." "No," said D'Artagnan, "it is in advance." "That is another thing," said Porthos, and he listened toward the quarter indicated by D'Artagnan. "Monsieur," said Mousqueton, who, abandoning his horse on the high road, had come on foot to rejoin his master. Phoebus could no longer hold out and... "Silence," said Porthos. In fact, at that moment a second neighing was borne to them on the night wind. "It is 500 feet from here in advance," said D'Artagnan. "True, monsieur," said Mousqueton. "And 500 feet from here is a small hunting house." "Mousqueton, thy pistols," said D'Artagnan. "I have them at hand, monsieur." "Porthos, take yours from your holsters." "I have them." "Good," said D'Artagnan, seizing his own. "Now you understand, Porthos?" "Not too well." "We are out on the king's service." "Well, for the king's service we need horses." "That is true," said Porthos. "Then not a word, but set to work." They went on through the darkness, silent as phantoms. They saw a light glimmering in the midst of some trees. "Yonder is the house, Porthos," said the Gascon. "Let me do what I please and do you what I do." They glided from tree to tree till they arrived at 20 steps from the house unperceived, and saw by means of a lantern suspended under a hut, for fine horses. A groom was rubbing them down. Near them were saddles and bridles. D'Artagnan approached quickly, making a sign to his two companions to remain a few steps behind. "I buy those horses," he said to the groom. The groom turned toward him with a look of surprise, but made no reply. "Didn't you hear, fellow?" "Yes, I heard." "Why then didn't you reply?" "Because these horses are not to be sold," was the reply. "I take them then," said the lieutenant. And he took hold of one within his reach. His two companions did the same thing. "Sir," cried the groom, "they have traversed 6 leagues and have only been unsaddled half an hour." "Half an hour's rest is enough," replied the Gascon. The groom cried aloud for help. A kind of steward appeared, just as D'Artagnan and his companions were prepared to mount. The steward attempted to expostulate. "My dear friend," cried the lieutenant, "if you say a word I will blow out your brains." "But sir," answered the steward, "do you know that these horses belong to Monsieur de Montbazon? So much the better. They must be good animals then." "Sir, I shall call my people." "And I mine. I've 10 guards behind me. Don't you hear them gallop? And I'm one of the king's musketeers." "Come, Porthos, come, Mousqueton." They all mounted the horses as quickly as possible. "Halloo! Hi! Hi!" cried the steward. "The house servants with the carbines." "On! On!" cried D'Artagnan. "There'll be firing." "On!" They all set off, swift as the wind. "Here!" cried the steward. "Here!" whilst the groom ran to a neighboring building. "Take care of your horses!" cried D'Artagnan to him. "Fire!" replied the steward. A gleam, like a flash of lightning, illumined the road, and with the flash was heard the whistling of balls, which were fired wildly in the air. "They fire like grooms," said Porthos. "In the time of the cardinal people fired better than that. Do you remember the road to Crèvecoeur, Mousqueton?" "Ah, sir. My left side still pains me." "Are you sure we are on the right track, Lieutenant?" "Egad, didn't you hear? These horses belong to Monsieur de Montbazon." "Well, Monsieur de Montbazon is the husband of Madame de Montbazon." And Madame de Montbazon is the mistress of the Duc de Beaufort." "Ah, I understand," replied Porthos. "She has ordered relays of horses." "Exactly so." "And we are pursuing the Duke with the very horses he has just left?" "My dear Porthos, you are really a man of most superior understanding," said D'Artagnan, with a look as if he spoke against his conviction. "Pooh," replied Porthos. "I am what I am." They rode on for an hour, till the horses were covered with foam and dust. "Zounds! What is yonder?" cried D'Artagnan. "You are very lucky if you see anything such a night as this," said Porthos. "Something bright." "I too," cried Mousqueton, "saw them also." "Ah, ah, have we overtaken them?" "Good. A dead horse," said D'Artagnan, pulling up his horse which shied. "It seems their horses, too, are breaking down as well as ours." "I seem to hear the noise of a troop of horsemen," exclaimed Porthos, leaning over his horse's mane. "Impossible. They appear to be numerous." "Then 'tis something else." "Another horse," said Porthos. "Dead." "No, dying." "Saddled?" "Yes, saddled and bridled." "Then we are upon the fugitives." "Courage, we have them." "But if they are numerous," observed Mousqueton, "'tis not we who have them, but they who have us." "Nonsense," cried D'Artagnan. "They'll suppose us to be stronger than themselves, as we're in pursuit. They'll be afraid and will disperse." "Certainly," remarked Porthos. "Ah, do you see?" cried the lieutenant. "The lights again. This time I too saw them," said Porthos. On. Forward! Forward!" cried D'Artagnan in his stentorian voice. "We shall laugh over all this in 5 minutes." And they darted on anew. The horses, excited by pain and emulation, raced over the dark road, in the midst of which was now seen a moving mass, denser and more obscure than the rest of the horizon. Chapter 26. The Rencontre. They rode on in this way for 10 minutes. Suddenly 2 dark forms seemed to separate from the mass, advanced, grew in size, and as they loomed up larger and larger, assumed the appearance of 2 horsemen. "Aha!" cried D'Artagnan, "they're coming toward us." "So much the worse for them," said Porthos. "Who goes there?" cried a hoarse voice. The 3 horsemen made no reply, stopped not, and all that was heard was the noise of swords drawn from the scabbards and the cocking of the pistols with which the 2 phantoms were armed. "Bridle and mouth," said D'Artagnan. Porthos understood him, and he and the lieutenant each drew with the left hand a pistol from their bolsters, and cocked it in their turn. "Who goes there?" was asked a second time. "Not a step forward, or you're dead men." "Stuff!" cried Porthos, almost choked with dust and chewing his bridle as a horse chews his bit. "Stuff and nonsense! We have seen plenty of dead men in our time." Hearing these words, the 2 shadows blockaded the road, and by the light of the stars might be seen the shining of their arms. "Back!" shouted D'Artagnan, "or you are dead." 2 shots were the reply to this threat, but the assailants attacked their foes with such velocity that in a moment they were upon them. A 3rd pistol shot was heard, aimed by D'Artagnan, and one of his adversaries fell. As for Porthos, he assaulted the foe with such violence that, although his sword was thrust aside, the enemy was thrown off his horse and fell about 10 steps from it. "Finish, Mouston, finish the work!" cried Porthos. And he darted on beside his friend, who had already begun a fresh pursuit. "Well," said Porthos. "I've broken my man's skull," cried D'Artagnan. "And you?" "I've only thrown the fellow down, but hark!" Another shot of a carbine was heard. It was Musketeer, who was obeying his master's command. "On! On!" cried D'Artagnan. "All goes well. We have the first throw." "Ha! Ha!" answered Porthos. "Behold, other players appear." And in fact, 2 other cavaliers made their appearance, detached, as it seemed, from the principal group. They again disputed the road. This time the lieutenant did not wait for the opposite party to speak. "Stand aside," he cried. "Stand off the road." "What do you want?" asked a voice. "The Duke." Porthos and D'Artagnan roared out both at once. A burst of laughter was the answer, but finished with a groan. D'Artagnan had, with his sword, cut in 2 the poor wretch who had laughed. At the same time Porthos and his adversary fired on each other, and D'Artagnan turned to him. "Bravo! You've killed him, I think." "No, wounded his horse only." "What would you have, my dear fellow? One doesn't hit the bullseye every time. It is something to hit inside the ring." "Ho! Parbleu! What is the matter with my horse?" "Your horse is falling," said Porthos, reining in his own. In truth, the lieutenant's horse stumbled and fell on his knees. Then a rattling in his throat was heard and he lay down to die. He had received in the chest the bullet of D'Artagnan's first adversary. D'Artagnan swore loud enough to be heard in the skies. "Does your honor want a horse?" asked Musketeer. "Zounds! Want one!" cried the Gascon. "Here's one, your honor." "How the devil hast thou 2 horses?" asked D'Artagnan, jumping on one of them. "Their masters are dead. I thought they might be useful, so I took them." Meantime Porthos had reloaded his pistols. "Be on the qui-vive," cried D'Artagnan. "Here are 2 other cavaliers." As he spoke, 2 horsemen advanced at full speed. "Ho! Your honor!" cried Musketeer. "The man you upset is getting up." "Why didn't thou do as thou didst to the first man?" said Porthos. "I held the horses, my hands were full, your honor." A shot was fired that moment. Musketeer shrieked with pain. "Ah, sir, I'm hit in the other side. Exactly opposite the other. This hurt is just the fellow of the one I had on the road to Amiens." Porthos turned around like a lion, plunged on the dismounted cavalier, who tried to draw his sword, but before it was out of the scabbard, Porthos, with the hilt of his had struck him such a terrible blow on the head that he fell like an ox beneath the butcher's knife. Mousqueton, groaning, slipped from his horse, his wound not allowing him to keep the saddle. On perceiving the cavaliers, D'Artagnan had stopped and charged his pistol afresh. Besides, his horse, he found, had a carbine on the bow of the saddle. "Here I am!" exclaimed Porthos. "Shall we wait, or shall we charge?" "Let us charge them," answered the Gascon. "Charge!" cried Porthos. They spurred on their horses. The other cavaliers were only 20 steps from them. "For the king!" cried D'Artagnan. "The king has no authority here," answered a deep voice, which seemed to proceed from a cloud, so enveloped was the cavalier in a whirlwind of dust. "'Tis well, we will see if the king's name is not a passport everywhere," replied the Gascon. "See," answered the voice. 2 shots were fired at once, one by D'Artagnan, the other by the adversary of Porthos. D'Artagnan's ball took off his enemy's hat. The ball fired by Porthos's foe went through the throat of his horse, which fell, groaning. "For the last time, where are you going?" "To the devil," answered D'Artagnan. "Good. You may be easy then, you'll get there." D'Artagnan then saw a musket barrel leveled at him. He had no time to draw from his holsters. He recalled a bit of advice which Athos had once given him, and made his horse rear. The ball struck the animal full in front. D'Artagnan felt his horse giving way under him, and with his wonderful agility threw himself to one side. "Ah, this," cried the voice, the tone of which was at once polished and jeering. "This is nothing but a butchery of horses and not a combat between men. To the sword, sir." "The sword!" And he jumped off his horse. "To the swords." "Be it so," replied D'Artagnan. "That is exactly what I want." D'Artagnan, in 2 steps, was engaged with the foe, whom, according to custom, he attacked impetuously, but he met this time with a skill and a strength of arm that gave him pause. Twice he was obliged to step back. His opponent stirred not 1 inch. D'Artagnan returned and again attacked him. Twice or thrice thrusts were attempted on both sides, without effect. Sparks were emitted from the swords like water spouting forth. At last D'Artagnan thought it was time to try one of his favorite feints in fencing. He brought it to bear, skillfully executed it with the rapidity of lightning, and struck the blow with a force which he fancied would prove irresistible. The blow was parried. "'Sdeath!" he cried, with his Gascon accent. At this exclamation his adversary bounded back, and, bending his bare head, tried to distinguish in the gloom the features of the lieutenant. As to D'Artagnan, afraid of some feint, he still stood on the defensive. "Have a care," cried Porthos to his opponent. "I've still 2 pistols charged." "The more reason you should fire the first," cried his foe. Porthos fired. The flash threw a gleam of light over the field of battle. As the light shone on them a cry was heard from the other 2 combatants. "Athos!" exclaimed D'Artagnan. "D'Artagnan!" ejaculated Athos. Athos raised his sword. D'Artagnan lowered his. "Aramis!" cried Athos. "Don't fire!" "Ah! Is it you, Aramis?" said Porthos. And he threw away his pistol. Aramis pushed his back into his saddlebags and sheathed his sword. "My son!" exclaimed Athos, extending his hand to D'Artagnan. This was the name which he gave him in former days, in their moments of tender intimacy. "Athos!" cried D'Artagnan, wringing his hands. "So you defend him? And I, who have sworn to take him dead or alive, I am dishonored, and by you." "Kill me," replied Athos, uncovering his breast, "if your honor requires my death." "Oh, woe is me! Woe is me!" cried the lieutenant. "There's only one man in the world who could stay my hand. By a fatality that very man bars my way. What shall I say to the cardinal?" "You can tell him, sir," answered a voice which was the voice of high command in the battlefield, "that he sent against me the only 2 men capable of getting the better of 4 men, of fighting man to man, without discomfiture, against the Comte de la Fère and the Chevalier d'Herblay, and of surrendering only to 50 men. The prince!" exclaimed at the same moment Athos and Aramis, unmasking as they addressed the Duc de Beaufort, whilst D'Artagnan and Porthos stepped backward. 50 cavaliers!" cried the Gascon and Porthos. "Look around you, gentlemen, if you doubt the fact," said the Duke. The 2 friends looked to the right, to the left. They were encompassed by a troop of horsemen. "Hearing the noise of the fight," resumed the Duke, I fancied you had about 20 men with you, so I came back with those around me, tired of always running away, and wishing to draw my sword in my own cause. But you are only 2. Yes, my lord, but as you have said, 2 that are a match for 20, said Athos. Come, gentlemen, your swords, said the duke. Our swords, cried D'Artagnan, raising his head and regaining his self-possession. Never. Never, added Porthos. Some of the men moved toward them. One moment, my lord, whispered Athos, and he said something in a low voice. As you will, replied the duke. I am too much indebted to you to refuse your first request. Gentlemen, he said to his escort, withdraw. Monsieur D'Artagnan, Monsieur Duvalin, you are free. The order was obeyed. D'Artagnan and Porthos then found themselves in the center of a large circle. Now, D'Herblay, said Athos, dismount and come here. Aramis dismounted and went to Porthos, whilst Athos approached D'Artagnan. All 4 once more together. Friends, said Athos, do you regret you have not shed our blood? No, replied D'Artagnan. I regret to see that we, hitherto united, are opposed to each other. Ah, nothing will ever go well with us hereafter. Oh heaven! No, all is over, said Porthos. Well, be on our side now, resumed Aramis. Silence, D'Herblay, cried Athos. Such proposals are not to be made to gentlemen such as these. 'Tis a matter of conscience with them, as with us. Meantime, here we are enemies, said Porthos. Gramercy, who would ever have thought it? D'Artagnan only sighed. Athos looked at them both and took their hands in his. Gentlemen, he said, this is a serious business and my heart bleeds as if you had pierced it through and through. Yes, we are severed. There is the great, the distressing truth. But we have not as yet declared war. Perhaps we shall have to make certain conditions. Therefore a solemn conference is indispensable. For my own part I demand it, said Aramis. I accept it, interposed D'Artagnan proudly. Porthos bowed as if in assent. Let us choose a place of rendezvous, continued Athos, and in a last interview arrange our mutual position, and the conduct we are to maintain toward each other. Good, the other 3 exclaimed. Well then, the place? Will the place royal suit you? Asked D'Artagnan. In Paris? Yes. Athos and Aramis looked at each other. The place royal, be it so, replied Athos. When? Tomorrow evening, if you like. At what hour? At 10 in the evening, if that suits you. By that time we shall have returned. Good. There, continued Athos. Either peace or war will be decided. Honor, at all events, will be maintained. Alas, murmured D'Artagnan, our honor as soldiers is lost to us forever. D'Artagnan, said Athos gravely, I assure you that you do me wrong in dwelling so upon that. What I think of is that we have crossed swords as enemies. Yes, he continued, sadly shaking his head. Yes, it is as you said, misfortune, indeed, has overtaken us. Come, Aramis. And we, Porthos, said D'Artagnan, will return, carrying our shame to the cardinal. And tell him, cried a voice, that I am not too old yet for a man of action. D'Artagnan recognized the voice of de Rochefort. Can I do anything for you, gentlemen? Asked the duke. Bear witness that we have done all that we could. That shall be testified to, rest assured. Adieu. We shall meet soon, I trust, in Paris, where you shall have your revenge. The duke, as he spoke, kissed his hand, spurred his horse into a gallop and disappeared, followed by his troop, who were soon lost in distance and darkness. D'Artagnan and Porthos were now alone with a man who held by the bridles 2 horses. They thought it was Musketeer, and went up to him. What do I see? Cried the lieutenant. Grimaud, is it thou? Grimaud signified that he was not mistaken. And whose horses are these? Cried D'Artagnan. Who has given them to us? Said Porthos. The Comte de la Fère. Athos. Athos, muttered D'Artagnan. You think of every one. You are indeed a nobleman. Whither art thou going, Grimaud? To join the Vicomte de Bragelonne in Flanders, your honor. They were taking the road toward Paris, when groans, which seemed to proceed from a ditch, attracted their attention. What is that? Asked D'Artagnan. It is I, Musketeer, said a mournful voice, whilst a sort of shadow arose out of the side of the road. Porthos ran to him. Art thou dangerously wounded? My dear Musketeer, he said. No, sir, but I am severely. What can we do? Said D'Artagnan. We must return to Paris. I will take care of Musketeer, said Grimaud. And he gave his arm to his old comrade, whose eyes were full of tears, nor could Grimaud tell whether the tears were caused by wounds or by the pleasure of seeing him again. D'Artagnan and Porthos went on meantime to Paris. They were passed by a sort of courier, covered with dust, the bearer of a letter from the Duke to the Cardinal, giving testimony to the valor of D'Artagnan and Porthos. Mazarin had passed a very bad night when this letter was brought to him, announcing that the Duke was free, and that he would henceforth raise up mortal strife against him. What consoles me, said the Cardinal after reading the letter, is that at least in this chase, D'Artagnan has done me one good turn. He has destroyed Broussel. This Gascon is a precious fellow. Even his misadventures are of use. The Cardinal referred to that man whom D'Artagnan upset at the corner of the Cimetière Saint-Jean in Paris, and who was no other than the Councillor Broussel. Chapter 27. The four old friends prepare to meet again. Well, said Porthos, seated in the courtyard of the Hôtel de la Chevrette, to D'Artagnan, who with a long and melancholy face had returned from the Palais Royal. Did he receive you ungraciously, my dear friend? I faith yes. A brute, that cardinal. What are you eating there, Porthos? I am dipping a biscuit in a glass of Spanish wine. Do the same. You are right. Gimblou, a glass of wine. Well, how has all gone off? Zounds! You know there's only one way of saying things, so I went in and said, My lord, we were not the strongest party. Yes, I know that, he said. But give me the particulars. You know, Porthos, I could not give him the particulars without naming our friends. To name them would be to commit them to ruin, so I merely said they were 50 and we were 2. There was firing nevertheless, I heard, he said. And your swords, they saw the light of day, I presume? That is the night, my lord, I answered. Ah, cried the Cardinal. I thought you were a Gascon, my friend? I am a Gascon, said I. Only when I succeed. The answer pleased him and he laughed. That will teach me, he said, to have my guards provided with better horses. For if they had been able to keep up with you and if each one of them had done as much as you and your friend, you would have kept your word and would have brought him back to me dead or alive. Well, there's nothing bad in that, it seems to me, said Porthos. Oh mon Dieu. No, nothing at all. It was the way in which he spoke. It is incredible how these biscuits soak up wine. They are veritable sponges. Gimblou, another bottle. The bottle was brought with a promptness which showed the degree of consideration D'Artagnan enjoyed in the establishment. He continued. So I was going away, but he called me back. You have had 3 horses foundered or killed, he asked me. Yes, my lord. How much were they worth? Why, said Porthos, that was very good of him, it seems to me. 1,000 pistoles, I said. 1,000 pistoles. Porthos exclaimed. Oh, that is a large sum. If he knew anything about horses he would dispute the price. Faith, he was very much inclined to do so, the contemptible fellow. He made a great start and looked at me. I also looked at him. Then he understood, and putting his hand into a drawer he took from it a quantity of notes on a bank in Lyons. For 1,000 pistoles? For 1,000 pistoles, just that amount, the beggar, not one too many. And you have them? They are here. Upon my word, I think he acted very generously. Generously. To men who had risked their lives for him. And besides had done him a great service. A great service, what was that? Why, it seems that I crushed for him a Parliament councillor. What? That little man in black that you upset at the corner of St. Jean's Cemetery. That's the man, my dear fellow. He was an annoyance to the Cardinal. Unfortunately, I didn't crush him flat. It seems that he came to himself, and that he will continue to be an annoyance. See that now, said Porthos, and I turn my horse aside from going plump onto him. That will be for another time. He owed me for the councillor, the pettifogger. But, said Porthos, if he was not crushed completely. Ah, Monsieur de Richelieu would have said, 500 crowns for the councillor. Well, let's say no more about it. How much were your animals worth, Porthos? Ah, if poor Musketeer were here, he could tell you to a fraction. No matter. You can tell within 10 crowns. Why, Vulcan and Bayard cost me each about 200 pistoles, and putting Phoebus at 150, we should be pretty near the amount. There will remain then 450 pistoles, said D'Artagnan contentedly. Yes, said Porthos. But there are the equipments. That is very true. He has received visits
how much
from the coadjutor, from Madame de Longueville,
100
and the
pistoles
Prince
for
de
the
Conti.
three.
Madame de
for the
Chevreuse
100
and Madame de
pistoles.
Vadome have
There
left their
remains
names at
then
his door.
350.
And now, whenever he wishes,
Porthos made a sign of assent.
Well, whenever he wishes,
we will give the 50
Planchet
pistoles
began
to the
to
hostess
sing.
for our
Un
expenses,
vent de Fronde,
said D'Artagnan.
Cesse leave si
and share
matin.
the 300.
We will
Grand,
share.
said
Contre le
Porthos.
Mazarine.
A paltry
Un
piece
vent de
of
Fronde.
business,
Murmured
murmured
D'Artagnan,
D'Artagnan,
crumpling his note.
It doesn't surprise me,
said
said
Porthos.
D'Artagnan.
It
in
is
a low
always
tone
that.
to Porthos.
But tell
that
me,
Mazarine would have
what?
been much better
Didn't he
satisfied
speak
had
of
I
me in
crushed
any
the life
way?
out of his counselor.
Yes, indeed.
You understand,
cried
then,
D'Artagnan,
monsieur,
who was
resumed
afraid of
Planchet,
disheartening his
that if
friend
it were
by
for
telling
some
him that the
enterprise
cardinal
like that
had not
undertaken
breathed a word
against
about
Monsieur
him.
Broussel, that
Yes,
you should
surely,
ask me
he
to
said.
take my carbine.
He said,
No,
resumed
don't be
Porthos.
alarmed. But where did
Stop.
you get all these
I want
details?
to remember his exact words.
From a good source, sir.
He said,
I heard it from
As to your
Friquet.
friend.
Tell
From
him he may
Friquet?
sleep in peace.
I know that name.
Good, very good.
A son of Monsieur
said
de
Porthos.
Broussel's servant.
That signified
And a
as
lad
clear
that,
as
I
daylight
promise
that he
you,
still
in a
intends to
revolt
make
will
me a
not give
baron.
away his share to the
At this
dogs.
moment 9 o'clock
Is
struck.
he not a singing boy at
D'Artagnan
Notre Dame?
started.
Asked
Ah,
D'Artagnan.
yes, said Porthos.
Yes, that is the
There is
very
9
boy.
o'clock.
He's patronized
We
by
have a
Bazin.
rendezvous, you remember.
Ah, yes, I
at
know.
the Place Royale.
Of what importance is this little
Stop.
reptile to you?
Hold your peace,
asked
Porthos.
Don't remind me of
Gad,
it, replied
'tis
D'Artagnan.
that which has made me so
He has
cross
already
since
given me good
yesterday.
information,
I shall
and
not
he may
go.
do the same again.
Why?
Whilst all this
Porthos.
was going on,
Because it is a
Athos
grievous
and
thing
Aramis
for me
were
to meet
entering
again
Paris
those
by
two
the
men who
Faubourg
caused the failure
Saint-Antoine.
of our enterprise.
They had taken some refreshment
And
on the
yet,
road and
said
hastened
Porthos,
on.
Neither
Neither
of
of
them
them
had
had
any
any
advantage
advantage
over
over
us.
place.
I still
Bazin
had a
was their
loaded
only
pistol,
attendant,
and you were
for
in
Grimaud
full
had
fight,
stayed behind
sword
to
in
take
hand.
care of Musketeer.
Yes,
as they were
said
passing
D'Artagnan.
onward.
But what if this
Athos
rendezvous
proposed
that
that
they
they
should
should
lay
lay
aside
aside
their
their
arms and military
said
costume,
Porthos,
and
you
assume
can't
a
think
dress
that
more suited to the
D'Artagnan.
city?
D'Artagnan
no,
did
dear
not believe
Count,
Athos to
cried
be capable
Aramis.
of a deception.
Is it not a warlike
But he sought an
encounter that we are
excuse for
going
not
to?
going to the
What do you
rendezvous.
mean, Aramis?
We must go.
That the Place
said the
Royale
superb
is
Lord
the
of
termination
Bracieux,
to the main
lest
road
they
to
should say we
Vendemois,
were afraid,
and nothing else.
We who have faced 50
What?
foes on the high
Our friends
road
can well meet
are become
too in
our
the
most
Place
dangerous
Royale.
enemies, Athos.
Yes, yes.
Let us
But
be
they
on our
took part
guard
with the princes without
Oh,
apprising
my
us
dear
of it.
D'Herblay,
Athos
who
and
can say
Aramis
whether
have played a
D'Artagnan
game with
may
me
not
which
have
alarms
betrayed
me.
us to the
We
cardinal?
discovered
Who can
yesterday
tell
the
whether
truth.
Mazarine may not
What is
take
the use of
advantage
going
of this
today to
rendezvous
learn
to
something
seize
else?
us? What?
You really
Aramis,
have some distrust,
you think
then,
that D'Artagnan,
said Porthos,
that Porthos
would
would
lend their
Aramis,
hands
yes,
to such an
since he has
infamy?
become an abbé.
Among friends,
You can't
my dear
imagine,
Athos,
my dear
no, you
fellow,
are right.
the sort of
But
man
among
he
enemies
is.
it would be only
He
a
sees us
stratagem.
on the road which leads him
Athos
to a
crossed his
bishopric,
arms
and
and bowed
perhaps
his
will not
noble
be
head.
sorry to get us
What
out
can
of
you
his
expect,
way.
Athos?
As
Men are
regards
so
Aramis,
made.
that is
And we
another
are not
thing,
always 20
said
years
Porthos.
old. And it
We have
wouldn't
cruelly
surprise me
wounded,
at all,
as you know,
perhaps
that
Monsieur
personal
de
pride
Beaufort
by
will
which
try in
D'Artagnan
his
is
turn
blindly
to lay
governed.
hands on us.
He has been beaten.
Nonsense.
Did you not
He
observe
had us in
his
his
despair
power,
on the journey?
and he let us go.
As to Porthos,
Besides, we can
his
be on our
barony
guard.
was perhaps
Let us
dependent on
take
that
arms.
affair.
Let Planchet
Well,
post
he
himself
found us on
behind
his
us
road
with his
and will not be
carbine.
barren this time.
Planchet is a
Perhaps
frondeur,
that famous
answered
barony will have
D'Artagnan.
something to do
Devil
with our
take these
interview
civil
this
wars.
evening.
One
Let us
can
take
no
our
more now reckon
precautions,
on one's
Athos.
friends than on one's
But
footmen.
suppose they come
said
unarmed?
Porthos. What a disgrace to
if
us.
Musketeer were here.
Oh, never fear.
There's a fellow who will never
Besides, if they
desert
do,
me.
we can easily
so long
make
as
an
you are
excuse.
rich.
We came straight off a
my
journey
friend,
and are insurgents
'tis not
too.
civil war that
An
disunites
excuse
us.
for us.
It is that
To
we
meet
are each of us
D'Artagnan
20
with a
years
false
older.
excuse.
It is
To
that
have
the
to
honest
make a false
emotions of
excuse
youth
to
have given
Porthos.
place to suggestions
Oh,
of
Aramis,
interest, continued
whispers of
Athos,
ambition,
shaking his
counsels
head
of
mournfully.
selfishness.
Upon my
Yes,
soul,
you are right.
You make me the most
Let us
miserable
go,
of men.
Porthos, but let us go
You
well
disenchant
armed.
a heart not
Were we
wholly
not to
dead
keep
to
the
friendship.
rendezvous,
They
go
would
in
declare
whatever
we
guise
were
you
afraid.
choose. For my
Halloo,
part, I shall go
Planchet.
unarmed. Here. No,
Saddle
for
our
I will not
horses,
allow you
take
to
your
do
carbine.
so. 'Tis not
Whom
one
are
man,
we going to
not
attack,
Athos
sir?
only,
No
not
one.
the Comte de
A
Lafayette
mere matter
whom
of
you will
precaution,
ruin by this amiable
answered the
weakness,
Gascon.
but a whole
You know,
party
sir,
to
that
whom
they
you
wish to
belong
murder
and who
that
depend
good
upon
counselor,
you.
Broussel,
Be it so
the
then,
father of the people,
replied
Athos
Really,
sorrowfully.
did they?
And they
said
pursued their
D'Artagnan.
road in mournful
Yes, but
silence.
he has been avenged.
Scarcely
He
had
was
they
carried
reached
home
by the
in the
Rue
Rue
de
de
la
la
Mule, the
people.
iron gate of
His
the
house
Place
has been
Royale,
full ever since.
when they perceived 3 cavaliers, D'Artagnan, Porthos and Planchet, the 2 former wrapped up in their military cloaks under which their swords were hidden, and Planchet, his musket by his side. They were waiting at the entrance of the Rue Saint Catherine, and their horses were fastened to the rings of the arcade. Athos, therefore, commanded Bazin to fasten up his horse and that of Aramis in the same manner. They then advanced 2 and 2, and saluted each other politely. Now where will it be agreeable to you that we hold our conference? Inquired Aramis, perceiving that people were stopping to look at them, supposing that they were going to engage in one of those far-famed duels still extant in the memory of the Parisians, and especially the inhabitants of the Place Royale. The gate is shut, said Aramis, but if these gentlemen like a cool retreat under the trees and perfect seclusion, I will get the key from the Hôtel de Rohan, and we shall be well suited. D'Artagnan darted a look into the obscurity of the place. Porthos ventured to put his head between the railings, to try if his glance could penetrate the gloom. If you prefer any other place, said Athos in his persuasive voice, choose for yourselves. This place, if Monsieur d'Herblay can procure the key, is the best that we can have, was the answer. Aramis went off at once, begging Athos not to remain alone within reach of D'Artagnan and Porthos. A piece of advice which was received with a contemptuous smile. Aramis returned soon with a man from the Hôtel de Rohan, who was saying to him, "You swear, sir, that it is not so?" "Stop," and Aramis gave him a louis d'or. "Ah, you will not swear, my master," said the concierge, shaking his head. "Well, one can never say what may happen. At present we and these gentlemen are excellent friends." "Yes, certainly," added Athos and the other two. D'Artagnan had heard the conversation, and had understood it. "You see," he said to Porthos. "What do I see?" "That he wouldn't swear." "Swear what?" "That man wanted Aramis to swear that we are not going to the Place Royale to fight." "And Aramis wouldn't swear?" "No." "Attention then." Athos did not lose sight of the two speakers. Aramis opened the gate and faced around in order that D'Artagnan and Porthos might enter. In passing through the gate, the hilt of the lieutenant's sword was caught in the grating, and he was obliged to pull off his cloak. In doing so he showed the butt end of his pistols, and a ray of the moon was reflected on the shining metal. "Do you see?" whispered Aramis to Athos, touching his shoulder with one hand and pointing with the other to the arms which the Gascon wore under his belt. "Alas! I do," replied Athos with a deep sigh. He entered third, and Aramis, who shut the gate after him, last. The two serving men waited without, but as if they likewise mistrusted each other, they kept their respective distances. Chapter 28. The Place Royale. They proceeded silently to the center of the place, but as at this very moment the moon had just emerged from behind a cloud, they thought they might be observed if they remained on that spot and therefore regained the shade of the lime trees. There were benches here and there. The four gentlemen stopped near them. At a sign from Athos, Porthos and D'Artagnan sat down. The two others stood in front of them. After a few minutes of silent embarrassment, Athos spoke. "Gentlemen," he said, "our presence here is the best proof of former friendship. Not one of us has failed the others at this rendezvous. Not one has, therefore, to reproach himself." "Hear me, Count," replied D'Artagnan. "Instead of making compliments to each other, let us explain our conduct to each other, like men of right and honest hearts. I wish for nothing more. Have you any cause of complaint against me or Monsieur d'Herblay? If so, speak out," answered Athos. "I have," replied D'Artagnan. "When I saw you at your chateau at Bragelonne, I made certain proposals to you which you perfectly understood. Instead of answering me as a friend, you played with me as a child. The friendship, therefore, that you boast of was not broken yesterday by the shock of swords, but by your dissimulation at your castle." "D'Artagnan," said Athos reproachfully, "you asked for candor and you have it. You ask what I have against you. I tell you, and I have the same sincerity to show you, if you wish, Monsieur d'Herblay. I acted in a similar way to you, and you also deceived me." "Really, monsieur, you say strange things," said Aramis. "You came seeking me to make to me certain proposals, but did you make them?" "No, you sounded me nothing more." "Very well, what did I say to you?" "That Mazarin was contemptible, and that I wouldn't serve Mazarin. But that is all. Did I tell you that I wouldn't serve any other? On the contrary, I gave you to understand, I think, that I adhered to the princes. We even joked very pleasantly, if I remember rightly, on the very probable contingency of your being charged by the cardinal with my arrest. Were you a party man? There is no doubt of that. Well, why should not we too belong to a party? You had your secret and we had ours. We didn't exchange them. So much the better. It proves that we know how to keep our secrets." I do not reproach you, monsieur, said D'Artagnan. 'Tis only because Monsieur de la Fère has spoken of friendship that I question your conduct. And what do you find in it that is worthy of blame? Asked Aramis haughtily. The blood mounted instantly to the temples of D'Artagnan, who arose and replied, I consider it worthy conduct of a pupil of Jesuits. On seeing D'Artagnan rise, Porthos rose also. These 4 men were therefore all standing at the same time, with a menacing aspect, opposite to each other. Upon hearing D'Artagnan's reply, Aramis seemed about to draw his sword, when Athos prevented him. D'Artagnan, he said, you are here tonight still infuriated by yesterday's adventure. I believed your heart noble enough to enable a friendship of 20 years to overcome an affront of a quarter of an hour. Come, do you really think you have anything to say against me? Say it then. If I am in fault, I will avow the error. The grave and harmonious tones of that beloved voice seemed to have still its ancient influence, whilst that of Aramis, which had become harsh and tuneless in his moments of ill humor, irritated him. He answered therefore, I think, Monsieur le Comte, that you had something to communicate to me at your chateau of Bragelonne, and that gentleman, he pointed to Aramis, had also something to tell me when I was in his convent. At that time I was not concerned in the adventure, in the course of which you have so successfully estopped me. However, because I was prudent, you must not take me for a fool. If I had wished to widen the breach between those whom Monsieur d'Herblay chooses to receive with a rope ladder, and those whom he receives with a wooden ladder, I could have spoken out. What are you meddling with? Cried Aramis, pale with anger, suspecting that D'Artagnan had acted as a spy on him and had seen him with Madame de Longueville. I never meddle save with what concerns me, and I know how to make believe that I haven't seen what does not concern me. But I hate hypocrites, and among that number I place musketeers who are abbés and abbés who are musketeers. And he added, turning to Porthos, here's a gentleman who's of the same opinion as myself. Porthos, who had not spoken one word, answered merely by a word and a gesture. He said yes, and he put his hand on his sword. Aramis started back and drew his. D'Artagnan bent forward, ready either to attack or to stand on his defense. Athos at that moment extended his hand with the air of supreme command which characterized him alone, drew out his sword and the scabbard at the same time, broke the blade in the sheath on his knee and threw the pieces to his right. Then turning to Aramis, Aramis, he said, break your sword. Aramis hesitated. It must be done, said Athos. Then in a lower and more gentle voice he added, I wish it. Then Aramis, paler than before, but subdued by these words, snapped the serpent blade between his hands, and then folding his arms, stood trembling with rage. These proceedings made D'Artagnan and Porthos draw back. D'Artagnan did not draw his sword. Porthos put his back into the sheath. Never, exclaimed Athos, raising his right hand to heaven. Never. I swear before God, who seeth us, and who in the darkness of this night heareth us, never shall my sword cross yours. Never may I express a glance of anger, nor my heart a throb of hatred at you. We lived together, we loved, we hated together. We shed, we mingled our blood together, and too probably, I may still add, that there may be yet a bond between us closer even than that of friendship. Perhaps there may be the bond of crime. For we four, we once did condemn, judge and slay a human being whom we had not any right to cut off from this world, although apparently fitter for hell than for this life. D'Artagnan, I have always loved you as my son. Porthos, we slept 6 years side by side. Aramis is your brother as well as mine, and Aramis has once loved you, as I love you now and as I have ever loved you. What can Cardinal Mazarin be to us? To 4 men who compelled such a man as Richelieu to act as we pleased? What is such or such a prince to us, who fixed the diadem upon a great queen's head? D'Artagnan, I ask your pardon for having yesterday crossed swords with you. Aramis does the same to Porthos. Now hate me if you can, but for my own part, I shall ever, even if you do hate me, retain esteem and friendship for you. I repeat my words, Aramis, and then if you desire it, and if they desire it, let us separate forever from our old friends. There was a solemn, though momentary silence, which was broken by Aramis. I swear, he said, with a calm brow and kindly glance, but in a voice still trembling with recent emotion. I swear that I no longer bear animosity to those who were once my friends. I regret that I ever crossed swords with you, Porthos. I swear not only that it shall never again be pointed at your breast, but that in the bottom of my heart there will never in future be the slightest hostile sentiment. Now Athos, come." Athos was about to retire. "Oh, no, no. Do not go away," exclaimed D'Artagnan, impelled by one of those irresistible impulses which showed the nobility of his nature, the native brightness of his character. "I swear that I would give the last drop of my blood and the last fragment of my limbs to preserve the friendship of such a friend as you, Athos, of such a man as you, Aramis." And he threw himself into the arms of Athos. "My son!" exclaimed Athos, pressing him in his arms. "And as for me," said Porthos, "I swear nothing, but I'm choked. Forsooth, if I were obliged to fight against you, I think I should allow myself to be pierced through and through, for I never loved any one but you in the wide world." An honest Porthos burst into tears as he embraced Athos. "My friends," said Athos, "this is what I expected from such hearts as yours. Yes, I have said it and I now repeat it. Our destinies are irrevocably united, although we now pursue divergent roads. I respect your convictions, and whilst we fight for opposite sides, let us remain friends. Ministers, princes, kings, will pass away like mountain torrents, civil war like a forest flame, but we shall remain. I have a presentiment that we shall." "Yes," replied D'Artagnan, "let us still be musketeers, and let us retain as our battle standard that famous napkin of the Bastion Saint-Gervais, on which the great cardinal had 3 fleurs de lis embroidered." "Be it so," cried Aramis. "Cardinalists or frondeurs, what matters it? Let us meet again as capital seconds in a duel, devoted friends in business, merry companions in our ancient pleasures. And whenever," added Athos, "we meet in battle at this word, place royale, let us put our swords into our left hands and shake hands with the right, even in the very lust and music of the hottest carnage." "You speak charmingly," said Porthos. "And are the first of men," added D'Artagnan. "You excel us all." Athos smiled with ineffable pleasure. "'Tis then all settled. Gentlemen, your hands. Are we not pretty good Christians?" "Egad," said D'Artagnan. "By heaven! Yes. We should be so on this occasion, if only to be faithful to our oath," said Aramis. "Ah, I'm ready to do what you will," cried Porthos, "even to swear by Mahomet. Devil take me if I've ever been so happy as at this moment." And he wiped his eyes, still moist. "Has not one of you a cross?" asked Athos. Aramis smiled and drew from his vest a cross of diamonds, which was hung around his neck by a chain of pearls. "Here is one," he said. "Well," resumed Athos, "swear on this cross, which, in spite of its magnificent material, is still a cross. Swear to be united in spite of everything, and forever, and may this oath bind us to each other, and even also our descendants. Does this oath satisfy you?" "Yes," said they all with one accord. "Ah, traitor," muttered D'Artagnan, leaning toward Aramis and whispering in his ear, "you have made us swear on the crucifix of a frondeuse." Chapter 29. The Ferry Across the Oise. We hope that the reader has not quite forgotten the young traveler, whom we left on the road to Flanders. In losing sight of his guardian, whom he had quitted, gazing after him in front of the royal basilican, Raoul spurred on his horse, in order not only to escape from his own melancholy reflections, but also to hide from Olivain the emotion his face might betray. 1 hour's rapid progress, however, sufficed to disperse the gloomy fancies that had clouded the young man's bright anticipations, and the hitherto unfelt pleasure of freedom, a pleasure which is sweet even to those who have never known dependence, seemed to Raoul to gild not only heaven and earth, but especially that blue but dim horizon of life we call the future. Nevertheless, after several attempts at conversation with Olivain, he foresaw that many days passed thus would prove exceedingly dull, and the Count's agreeable voice, his gentle and persuasive eloquence, recurred to his mind at the various towns through which they journeyed, and about which he had no longer anyone to give him those interesting details which he would have drawn from Athos, the most amusing and the best informed of guides. Another recollection contributed also to sadden Raoul. On their arrival at Senories he had perceived, hidden behind a screen of poplars, a little chateau which so vividly recalled that of La Valliere to his mind that he halted for nearly 10 minutes to gaze at it, and resumed his journey with a sigh too abstracted even to reply to Olivain's respectful inquiry about the cause of so much fixed attention. The aspect of external objects is often a mysterious guide communicating with the fibers of memory, which in spite of us will arouse them at times. This thread, like that of Ariadne, when once unraveled will conduct one through a labyrinth of thought, in which one loses one's self in endeavoring to follow that phantom of the past which is called recollection. Now the sight of this chateau had taken Raoul back 50 leagues westward, and had caused him to review his life from the moment when he had taken leave of little Louise to that in which he had seen her for the first time. And every branch of oak, every gilded weathercock on roof of slates, reminded him that, instead of returning to the friends of his childhood, every instant estranged him further, and that perhaps he had even left them forever. With a full heart and burning head he desired Olivain to lead on the horses to a wayside inn, which he observed within gunshot range, a little in advance of the place they had reached. As for himself, he dismounted and remained under a beautiful group of chestnuts in flower, amidst which were murmuring a multitude of happy bees, and bade Olivain send the host to him with writing paper and ink, to be placed on a table which he found there, conveniently ready. Olivain obeyed and continued on his way, whilst Raoul remained sitting, with his elbow leaning on the table, from time to time gently shaking the flowers from his head, which fell upon him like snow, and gazing vaguely on the charming landscape spread out before him, dotted over with green fields and groups of trees. Raoul had been there about 10 minutes, during 5 of which he was lost in reverie, when there appeared within the circle comprised in his rolling gaze a man with a rubicund face, who, with a napkin around his body, another under his arm, and a white cap upon his head, approached him, holding paper, pen and ink in hand. "Ha! Ha!" laughed the apparition. "Every gentleman seems to have the same fancy, for not a quarter of an hour ago a young lad, well mounted like you, as tall as you and of about your age, halted before this clump of trees and had this table and this chair brought here, and dined here, with an old gentleman who seemed to be his tutor, upon a pie, of which they haven't left a mouthful, and 2 bottles of Macon wine, of which they haven't left a drop, but fortunately we have still some of the same wine, and some of the same pies left, and if your worship will but give your orders." "No, friend," replied Raoul, smiling. "I am obliged to you, but at this moment I want nothing but the things for which I have asked. Only I shall be very glad if the ink prove black and the pen good. Upon these conditions I will pay for the pen the price of the bottle, and for the ink the price of the pie." "Very well, sir," said the host. "I'll give the pie and the bottle of wine to your servant, and in this way you will have the pen and ink into the bargain." "Do as you like," said Raoul, who was beginning his apprenticeship with that particular class of society, who, when there were robbers on the highroads, were connected with them, and who, since highwaymen no longer exist, have advantageously and aptly filled their vacant place. The host, his mind at ease about his bill, placed pen, ink and paper upon the table. By a lucky chance the pen was tolerably good, and Raoul began to write. The host remained standing in front of him, looking with a kind of involuntary admiration at his handsome face, combining both gravity and sweetness of expression. Beauty has always been and always will be all-powerful. "He's not a guest like the other one here just now," observed mine host to Olivain, who had rejoined his master to see if he wanted anything. "And your young master has no appetite." "My master had appetite enough 3 days ago, but what can one do? He lost it the day before yesterday." And Olivain and the host took their way together toward the inn. Olivain, according to the custom of serving men well pleased with their place, relating to the tavern keeper all that he could say in favor of the young gentleman, whilst Raoul wrote on thus: "Sir, after a 4 hours' march I stop to write to you, for I miss you every moment, and I am always on the point of turning my head as if to reply when you speak to me. I was so bewildered by your departure and so overcome with grief at our separation, that I am sure I was able to but very feebly express all the affection and gratitude I feel toward you. You will forgive me, sir, for your heart is of such a generous nature that you can well understand all that has passed in mine. I entreat you to write to me, for you form a part of my existence, and if I may venture to tell you so, I also feel anxious. It seemed to me as if you were yourself preparing for some dangerous undertaking, about which I did not dare to question you, since you told me nothing. I have therefore, as you see, great need of hearing from you. Now that you are no longer beside me, I am afraid every moment of erring. You sustain me powerfully, sir, and I protest to you that today I feel very lonely. Will you have the goodness, sir, should you receive news from Blois, to send me a few lines about my little friend Mademoiselle de la Valliere, about whose health, when we left, so much anxiety was felt? You can understand, honored and dear guardian, how precious and indispensable to me is the remembrance of the years that I have passed with you. I hope that you will sometimes, too, think of me, and if at certain hours you should miss me, if you should feel any slight regret at my absence, I shall be overwhelmed with joy at the thought that you appreciate my affection for and my devotion to yourself, and that I have been able to prove them to you whilst I had the happiness of living with you. After finishing this letter, Raoul felt more composed. He looked well around him to see if Olivain and the host might not be watching him, whilst he impressed a kiss upon the paper, a mute and touching caress, which the heart of Athos might well divine on opening the letter. During this time Olivain had finished his bottle and eaten his pie. The horses were also refreshed. Raoul motioned to the host to approach, threw a crown upon the table, mounted his horse, and posted his letter at Senlis. The rest that had been thus afforded to men and horses enabled them to continue their journey at a good round pace. At Verberie, Raoul desired Olivain to make some inquiry about the young man who was preceding them. He had been observed to pass only 3/4 of an hour previously, but he was well mounted, as the tavern-keeper had already said, and rode at a rapid pace. "Let us try and overtake this gentleman," said Raoul to Olivain. "Like ourselves, he is on his way to join the army and may prove agreeable company." It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon when Raoul arrived at Compiègne. There he dined heartily and again inquired about the young gentleman who was in advance of them. He had stopped, like Raoul, at the Hotel of the Bell and Bottle, the best at Compiègne, and had started again on his journey, saying that he should sleep at Noyon. "Well, let us sleep at Noyon," said Raoul. "Sir," replied Olivain respectfully, "allow me to remark that we have already much fatigued the horses this morning. I think it would be well to sleep here, and to start again very early tomorrow. 18 leagues is enough for the first stage." "The Comte de la Fere wished me to hasten on," replied Raoul, "that I might rejoin the prince on the morning of the 4th day. Let us push on then to Noyon. It will be a stage similar to those we traveled from Blois to Paris. We shall arrive at 8 o'clock. The horses will have a long night's rest, and at 5 o'clock tomorrow morning we can be again on the road." Olivain dared offer no opposition to this determination, but he followed his master, grumbling. Go on," said he between his teeth. "Expend your ardor the first day. Tomorrow, instead of journeying 20 leagues, you will travel 10, the day after tomorrow 5, and in 3 days you will be in bed. There you must rest. Young people are such braggarts." It was easy to see that Olivain had not been taught in the school of the Planchets and the Grimauds. Raoul really felt tired, but he was desirous of testing his strength, and brought up in the principles of Athos and certain of having heard him speak 1,000 times of stages of 25 leagues, he did not wish to fall far short of his model. D'Artagnan, that man of iron, who seemed to be made of nerve and muscle only, had struck him with admiration. Therefore, in spite of Olivain's remarks, he continued to urge his steed more and more, and following a pleasant little path, leading to a ferry, and which he had been assured shortened the journey by the distance of 1 league, he arrived at the summit of a hill and perceived the river flowing before him. A little troop of men on horseback were waiting on the edge of the stream, ready to embark. Raoul did not doubt this was the gentleman and his escort. He called out to him, but they were too distant to be heard. Then, in spite of the weariness of his beast, he made it gallop, but the rising ground soon deprived him of all sight of the travelers, and when he had again attained a new height, the ferryboat had left the shore and was making for the opposite bank. Raoul, seeing that he could not arrive in time to cross the ferry with the travelers, halted to wait for Olivain. At this moment a shriek was heard that seemed to come from the river. Raoul turned toward the side whence the cry had sounded, and shaded his eyes from the glare of the setting sun with his hand. "Olivain," he exclaimed, "what do I see below there?" A second scream, more piercing than the first, now sounded. "Oh, sir," cried Olivain, "the rope which holds the ferryboat has broken and the boat is drifting. But what do I see in the water? Something struggling." "Oh yes," exclaimed Raoul, fixing his glance on one point in the stream, splendidly illumined by the setting sun. A horse, a rider. They are sinking, cried Olivain in his turn. It was true, and Raoul was convinced that some accident had happened and that a man was drowning. He gave his horse its head, struck his spurs into its sides, and the animal, urged by pain and feeling that he had space open before him, bounded over a kind of paling which enclosed the landing place, and fell into the river, scattering to a distance waves of white froth. "Ah, sir!" cried Olivain. "What are you doing? Good God!" Raoul was directing his horse toward the unhappy man in danger. This was, in fact, a custom familiar to him. Having been brought up on the banks of the Loire, he might have been said to have been cradled on its waves. 100 times he had crossed it on horseback, 1,000 times had swum across. Athos, foreseeing the period when he should make a soldier of the Viscount, had inured him to all kinds of arduous undertakings. "Oh heavens!" continued Olivain in despair. "What would the Count say if he only saw you now?" "The Count would do as I do," replied Raoul, urging his horse vigorously forward. But I," cried Olivain, pale and disconsolate, rushing about on the shore. "How shall I cross?" "Leap, coward!" cried Raoul, swimming on, then addressing the traveler, who was struggling 20 yards in front of him. "Courage, sir," said he, "courage! We are coming to your aid." Olivain advanced, retired, then made his horse rear, turned it, and then, struck to the core by shame, leaped, as Raoul had done, only repeating, "I am a dead man. We are lost." In the meantime, the ferry-boat had floated away, carried down by the stream, and the shrieks of those whom it contained resounded more and more. A man with grey hair had thrown himself from the boat into the river, and was swimming vigorously toward the person who was drowning, but being obliged to go against the current he advanced but slowly. Raoul continued his way and was visibly gaining ground, but the horse and its rider, of whom he did not lose sight, were evidently sinking. The nostrils of the horse were no longer above water, and the rider, who had lost the reins in struggling, fell with his head back and his arms extended. One moment longer, and all would disappear. "Courage!" cried Raoul. "Courage!" "Too late," murmured the young man. "Too late." The water closed above his head and stifled his voice. Raoul sprang from his horse, to which he left the charge of its own preservation, and in 3 or 4 strokes was at the gentleman's side. He seized the horse at once by the curb and raised its head above water. The animal began to breathe again and, as if he comprehended that they had come to his aid, redoubled his efforts. Raoul at the same time seized one of the young man's hands and placed it on the mane, which it grasped with the tenacity of a drowning man. Thus, sure that the rider would not release his hold, Raoul now only directed his attention to the horse, which he guided to the opposite bank, helping it to cut through the water and encouraging it with words. All at once the horse stumbled against a ridge, and then placed its foot on the sand. "Saved!" exclaimed the man with grey hair, who also touched bottom. "Saved!" mechanically repeated the young gentleman, releasing the mane and sliding from the saddle into Raoul's arms. Raoul was but 10 yards from the shore. There he bore the fainting man, and laying him down upon the grass, unfastened the buttons of his collar and unhooked his doublet. A moment later the grey-headed man was beside him. Olivain managed in his turn to land, after crossing himself repeatedly, and the people in the ferry-boat guided themselves as well as they were able toward the bank, with the aid of a pole which chanced to be in the boat. Thanks to the attentions of Raoul and the man who accompanied the young gentleman, the color gradually returned to the pale cheeks of the dying man, who opened his eyes, at first entirely bewildered, but who soon fixed his gaze upon the person who had saved him. "Ah, sir," he exclaimed, "it was you. Without you I was a dead man, thrice dead." "But one recovers, sir, as you perceive," replied Raoul, "and we have but had a little bath." "Oh, sir, what gratitude I feel!" exclaimed the man with grey hair. "Ah, there you are, my good Darmanges. I have given you a great fright, have I not? But it is your own fault. You were my tutor, why did you not teach me to swim?" "Oh, Monsieur le Comte," replied the old man, "had any misfortune happened to you, I should never have dared to show myself to the Marshal again." "But how did the accident happen?" asked Raoul. "Oh, sir, in the most natural way possible," replied he to whom they had given the title of Count. "We were about 1/3 of the way across the river when the cord of the ferry-boat broke. Alarmed by the cries and gestures of the boatman, My horse sprang into the water. I cannot swim, and dared not throw myself into the river. Instead of aiding the movements of my horse, I paralyzed them. And I was just going to drown myself with the best grace in the world, when you arrived just in time to pull me out of the water. Therefore, sir, if you will agree, henceforward we are friends until death. Sir, replied Raoul, bowing, I am entirely at your service, I assure you. I am called the Count de Guiche, continued the young man. My father is the Maréchal de Gramont. And now that you know who I am, do me the honor to inform me who you are. I am the Viscount de Bragelonne, answered Raoul, blushing at being unable to name his father, as the Count de Guiche had done. Viscount, your countenance, your goodness and your courage incline me toward you. My gratitude is already due. Shake hands, I crave your friendship. Sir, said Raoul, returning the Count's pressure of the hand, I like you already from my heart. Pray regard me as a devoted friend, I beseech you. And now where are you going, Viscount? Inquired de Guiche. To join the army, under the Prince Count. And I too, exclaimed the young man in a transport of joy. Oh, so much the better, we will fire the first shot together. It is well, be friends, said the tutor. Young as you both are, you were perhaps born under the same star and were destined to meet. And now, continued he, you must change your clothes. Your servants, to whom I gave directions the moment they had left the ferryboat, ought to be already at the inn. Linen and wine are both being warmed, come. The young men had no objection to this proposition. On the contrary, they thought it very timely. They mounted again at once, whilst looks of admiration passed between them. They were indeed two elegant horsemen, with figures slight and upright, noble faces, bright and proud looks, loyal and intelligent smiles. De Guiche might have been about 18 years of age, but he was scarcely taller than Raoul, who was only 15. Chapter 30. Skirmishing. The halt at Noyon was but brief, every one there being wrapped in profound sleep. Raoul had desired to be awakened should Grimaud arrive, but Grimaud did not arrive. Doubtless, too, the horses on their part appreciated the 8 hours of repose and the abundant stabling which was granted them. The Count de Guiche was awakened at 5 o'clock in the morning by Raoul, who came to wish him good day. They breakfasted in haste, and at 6 o'clock had already gone 10 miles. The young Count's conversation was most interesting to Raoul, therefore he listened much, whilst the Count talked well and long. Brought up in Paris, where Raoul had been but once, at the court, which Raoul had never seen, his follies as page, 2 duels which he had already found the means of fighting, in spite of the edicts against them and more especially, in spite of his tutor's vigilance. These things excited the greatest curiosity in Raoul. Raoul had only been at Musketeer's house. He named to Guiche the people whom he had seen there. Guiche knew everybody. Madame de Neuillan, Mademoiselle d'Aubagne, Mademoiselle de Scudery, Mademoiselle Paulette, Madame de Chevreuse. He criticized everybody humorously. Raoul trembled, lest he should laugh among the rest at Madame de Chevreuse, for whom he entertained deep and genuine sympathy, but either instinctively, or from affection for the Duchess, he said everything in her favor. His praises increased Raoul's friendship twofold. Then came the question of gallantry and love affairs. Under this head, also Bragelonne had much more to hear than to tell. He listened attentively and fancied that he discovered through 3 or 4 rather frivolous adventures, that the Count, like himself, had a secret to hide in the depths of his heart. De Guiche, as we have said before, had been educated at the court, and the intrigues of this court were not unknown to him. It was the same court of which Raoul had so often heard the Comte de la Fère speak, except that its aspect had much changed since the period when Athos had himself been part of it. Therefore everything which the Count de Guiche related was new to his traveling companion. The young Count, witty and caustic, passed all the world in review. The Queen herself was not spared, and Cardinal Mazarin came in for his share of ridicule. The day passed away as rapidly as an hour. The Count's tutor, a man of the world and a bon vivant, up to his eyes in learning, as his pupil described him, often recalled the profound erudition, the witty and caustic satire of Athos to Raoul, but as regarded grace, delicacy, and nobility of external appearance, no one in these points was to be compared to the Comte de la Fère. The horses, which were more kindly used than on the previous day, stopped at Arras at 4 o'clock in the evening. They were approaching the scene of war. And as bands of Spaniards sometimes took advantage of the night to make expeditions even as far as the neighborhood of Arras, they determined to remain in the town until the morrow. The French army held all between Pont-et-Marc as far as Valenciennes, falling back upon Douai. The prince was said to be in person at Bethune. The enemy's army extended from Castle to Courtrai, and as there was no species of violence or pillage it did not commit, the poor people on the frontier quitted their isolated dwellings and fled for refuge into the strong cities which held out a shelter to them. Arras was encumbered with fugitives. An approaching battle was much spoken of, the prince having maneuvered, until that movement, only in order to await a reinforcement that had just reached him. The young men congratulated themselves on having arrived so opportunely. The evening was employed in discussing the war. The grooms polished their arms. The young men loaded the pistols in case of a skirmish, and they awoke in despair, having both dreamed that they had arrived too late to participate in the battle. In the morning it was rumored that Prince de Condé had evacuated Bethune and fallen back on Carvin, leaving, however, a strong garrison in the former city. But as there was nothing positively certain in this report, the young warriors decided to continue their way toward Bethune, free on the road to diverge to the right and march to Carvin if necessary. The Count's tutor was well acquainted with the country. He consequently proposed to take a crossroad, which lay between that of Lens and that of Bethune. They obtained information at Ablain, and a statement of their route was left for Grimaud. About 7 o'clock in the morning they set out. De Guiche, who was young and impulsive, said to Raoul, "Here we are, 3 masters and 3 servants. Our valets are well armed and yours seems to be tough enough." "I have never seen him put to the test," replied Raoul. "But he is a Breton, which promises something." Yes, resumed de Guiche. "I am sure he can fire a musket when required. On my side I have 2 sure men, who have been in action with my father. We therefore represent 6 fighting men. If we should meet a little troop of enemies, equal or even superior in number to our own, shall we charge them, Raoul?" "Certainly, sir," replied the Viscount. "Halloa! Young people, stop there," said the tutor, joining in the conversation. "Zounds! How you maneuver my instructions, Count. You seem to forget the orders I received to conduct you safe and sound to His Highness the Prince. Once with the army you may be killed at your good pleasure, but until that time, I warn you that in my capacity of general of the army, I shall order a retreat and turn my back on the first red coat we come across." De Guiche and Raoul glanced at each other, smiling. They arrived at Ablain without accident. There they inquired and learned that the prince had in reality quitted Bethune and stationed himself between Cambria and La Venthie. Therefore, leaving directions at every place for Grimaud, they took a crossroad which conducted the little troop by the bank of a small stream flowing into the Lys. The country was beautiful, intersected by valleys as green as the emerald. Here and there they passed little copses crossing the path which they were following. In anticipation of some ambuscade in each of these little woods, the tutor placed his 2 servants at the head of the band, thus forming the advance guard. Himself and the 2 young men represented the body of the army, whilst Olivain, with his rifle upon his knee and his eyes upon the watch, protected the rear. They had observed for some time before them, on the horizon, a rather thick wood, and when they had arrived at a distance of 100 steps from it, Monsieur d'Armings took his usual precautions and sent on in advance the Count's 2 grooms. The servants had just disappeared under the trees, followed by the tutor, and the young men were laughing and talking about 100 yards off. Olivain was at the same distance in the rear, when suddenly there resounded 5 or 6 musket shots. The tutor cried halt. The young men obeyed, pulling up their steeds, and at the same moment the 2 valets were seen returning at a gallop. The young men, impatient to learn the cause of the firing, spurred on toward the servants. The tutor followed them. "Were you stopped?" eagerly inquired the 2 youths. "No," replied the servants. "It is even probable that we have not been seen. The shots were fired about 100 paces in advance of us, in the thickest part of the wood, and we returned to ask your advice." "My advice is this," said Monsieur d'Armings, "and if needs be my will, that we beat a retreat. There may be an ambuscade concealed in this wood." "Did you see nothing there?" asked the Count. "I thought I saw," said one of the servants, "horsemen dressed in yellow, creeping along the bed of the stream. "That's it," said the tutor. "We have fallen in with a party of Spaniards. Come back, sirs, back." The two youths looked at each other, and at this moment a pistol shot and cries for help were heard. Another glance between the young men convinced them both that neither had any wish to go back, and as the tutor had already turned his horse's head, they both spurred forward, Raoul crying, "Follow me, Olivain," and the Count de Guiche. "Follow, Urban and Planchet." And before the tutor could recover from his surprise they had both disappeared into the forest. Whilst they spurred their steeds they held their pistols ready also. In 5 minutes they arrived at the spot whence the noise had proceeded, and then restraining their horses, they advanced cautiously. "Hush," whispered de Guiche. "These are cavaliers." "Yes, 3 on horseback and 3 who have dismounted." "Can you see what they are doing?" "Yes, they appear to be searching a wounded or dead man." "It is some cowardly assassination," said de Guiche. "They are soldiers though," resumed de Bragelonne. "Yes, skirmishers, that is to say highway robbers." "At them!" cried Raoul. "At them!" echoed de Guiche. "Oh, gentlemen, gentlemen, in the name of heaven!" cried the poor tutor. But he was not listened to, and his cries only served to arouse the attention of the Spaniards. The men on horseback at once rushed at the 2 youths, leaving the 3 others to complete the plunder of the dead or wounded travelers. For on approaching nearer, instead of one extended figure, the young men discovered 2. De Guiche fired the first shot at 10 paces and missed his man, and the Spaniard, who had advanced to meet Raoul, aimed in his turn, and Raoul felt a pain in the left arm, similar to that of a blow from a whip. He let off his fire at but 4 paces. Struck in the breast and extending his arms, the Spaniard fell back on the crupper, and the terrified horse, turning around, carried him off. Raoul at this moment perceived the muzzle of a gun pointed at him, and remembering the recommendation of Athos, he, with the rapidity of lightning, made his horse rear as the shot was fired. His horse bounded to one side, losing its footing, and fell, entangling Raoul's leg under its body. The Spaniard sprang forward and seized the gun by its muzzle, in order to strike Raoul on the head with the butt. In the position in which Raoul lay, unfortunately, he could neither draw his sword from the scabbard, nor his pistols from their holsters. The butt end of the musket hovered over his head, and he could scarcely restrain himself from closing his eyes, when with one bound Guiche reached the Spaniard and placed a pistol at his throat. "Yield," he cried, "or you are a dead man." The musket fell from the soldier's hands, who yielded on the instant. Guiche summoned one of his grooms, and delivering the prisoner into his charge, with orders to shoot him through the head if he attempted to escape, he leaped from his horse and approached Raoul. "Faith, sir," said Raoul, smiling, although his pallor betrayed the excitement consequent on a first affair. "You are in a great hurry to pay your debts and have not been long under any obligation to me. Without your aid," continued he, repeating the Count's words, "I should have been a dead man, thrice dead." "My antagonist took flight," replied de Guiche, "and left me at liberty to come to your assistance." "But are you seriously wounded? I see you are covered with blood." "I believe," said Raoul, "that I have got something like a scratch on the arm. If you will help me to drag myself from under my horse, I hope nothing need prevent us continuing our journey." Monsieur d'Armings and Olivain had already dismounted, and were attempting to raise the struggling horse. At last Raoul succeeded in drawing his foot from the stirrup and his leg from under the animal, and in a second he was on his feet again. "Nothing broken?" asked de Guiche. "Faith, no, thank heaven," replied Raoul. "But what has become of the poor wretches whom these scoundrels were murdering?" "I fear we arrived too late. They have killed them, I think, and taken flight, carrying off their booty. My servants are examining the bodies." "Let us go and see whether they are quite dead, or if they can still be helped," suggested Raoul. "Olivain, we have come into possession of 2 horses, but I have lost my own. Take for yourself the better of the 2 and give me yours." They approached the spot where the unfortunate victims lay.